Washington today, to Florida today, and said he was going to come back to Washington, which is exactly what the country expects of him. And he said very briefly on camera that this terrorism against the United States will not stand. As we've said before, the kind of thing he had to say. And John Cochran went to Florida with him. And John, I think you're still in Florida and the president came home. Is that my understanding?
That's right. We're grounded like all other Americans. The airport here is close to us. The president is on his way back, but we don't know where he's going to land. You know, normally, Peter, the president would land at Andrews Air Force Base, Maryland, a military base, a secure base just outside of Washington, D.C. However, network camera crews have been barred from going to Andrews Air Force Base. It apparently has been roped off and barred to news media. We do not know if the president is going there, and the White House is being very closed-mouthed about it. And you can understand why they would want to create the question in some people's minds as to where the president will land. We've been told that when the president returns, he will have a National Security Council meeting. But where will that happen? Will it be in Washington? I can't help but think back to November 22nd, 1963, the assassination of John Kennedy. At that time, the Secret Service was in a great hurry to get the new president, Lyndon Johnson, back to Washington, D.C. It's no longer clear today that Washington, D.C. is such a safe place, Peter.
Thank you very much, John. Please stay in touch and let us know when you can make your way to Washington. The uncertainty in Washington has led authorities to ask the political leadership in the Congress, we know at least in the Senate, to go to a safe location. Earlier reports about a bomb outside the State Department, we believe, are now not correct. But there was this attack on the Pentagon, and there's this mixture in Washington of deep, profound tension and almost and alertness. You certainly get a quick glimpse there of the security force, which is a constant presence on the roof of the White House, on guard there. But there is a natural instinct, not only for the president to go to Washington, not merely for the security, because it's the nation's capital and it's where all of us in the country will look to the president for leadership and response in the hours and the days ahead, and it'll be maybe a couple of hours yet before the president gets to Washington. Meanwhile, on the ground, we have people of all persuasion, eyewitnesses, journalists on the ground, who have been party to seeing this thing and are beginning to piece together for us the human dimension of how horrendous this is. And this, of course, is Times Square, in which you can imagine that people have stopped, and this happens to be the ABC News screen in Times Square, which at a time like this, as Times Square has always been for more than a century, it's always been a place where people gather to see the news. But Drew Milhon, ABC News' Drew Milhon, actually saw this happen, and I believe, Drew, you're on the phone at the moment, am I correct?
Yes, Peter, I'm here.
Would you go ahead?
Sure. I was at the corner of Varick and Canal, which is about 10 to 12 blocks north of the World Trade Center, where roughly 300 to 400 people were gathered watching the flames and the smoke from both World Trade Centers going through the air. And I began to cross the street, and I heard a collective scream from this group of people. And I looked up, and the first World Trade Center that collapsed was falling down. The shriek lasted for quite a long time, and then many of these people fell into tears, just crying and sobbing. I don't know where my mother is. I don't know where my friends are. That sort of thing was heard all around this crowd.
Okay, Drew, and where are you at the moment? You're in the same location?
Yes, I am. I'm at Varick. I'm just north of that now. I'm at Varick and Canal.
And people are not familiar, people from outside New York are not familiar, but you're at the lower west corner of the island of Manhattan. And is that whole lower part of Manhattan being either evacuated or people just leaving it en masse?
It is being evacuated. No cars are allowed south of Canal, which is basically the last major thoroughfare that goes east to west on Manhattan. After the first Trade Center went down, I tried to get closer to the scene, and police and FBI agents were telling everyone, both plainclothes policemen and uniformed policemen were telling everyone they had to go north of Canal. They were pushing everyone back. Okay,
thank you very much, Drew Milhon. Please check in with developments. I can tell you that the reports that we now get from a variety of places, let me just stay with the map of New York City, because the New York City Emergency Management Center is, if you're looking at that map, is just like on the tip of the building there to the north. Both those buildings have gone, and at a moment like this, they and the political establishment in the city, as well as the state and federal authorities, would coordinate operations from in there. And there are other, as you look around that, Manhattan itself, as far up as the Williamsburg Bridge and beyond, of course, is the United Nations. People have always been concerned that these at least two of the tunnels, the Holland Tunnel for one, the Lincoln Tunnel is not on that map, but these are the tunnels that go across the Hudson River to New Jersey and out onto the west, and that even perhaps the bridges. But elsewhere in the city, City Hall would be vulnerable as well. The United Nations, the tunnels, and of course FBI headquarters, which is about in the middle of Manhattan, not too far from the New York Stock Exchange, which you cannot see on that map at the moment. But there was nothing, John Miller's with me still, thank you very much, and I'm glad you are, nothing more patently, obviously vulnerable than the trade towers.
Or no larger set of symbolic targets. It's what they mean. They stand for American commerce. They stand for the American establishment, and in some way, just by their size and profile, American might. And the fact that they were an earlier target and that they withstood that, I think, made them even a more attractive target the second time around.
You can see people, and again, I'm not quite sure what we're looking at here, and I wish somebody would put pictures up. Okay, this is clearly a New York fire rig. And communications are extremely, extremely difficult, as you can imagine, in a circumstance like this.
One of the things
sometimes what you get is a picture that is either taken from a different angle or of a different thing.
One of the things they're grappling with here is what is the crime scene. They've been talking about that today. The crime scene unit responded expecting that they'd have a massive crime scene, the World Trade Center tower, then two towers. Then the two towers collapsed, making their crime scene not only much more difficult to process, but massive. Consider the prospect of sifting for evidence, trying to find the black boxes, the in-flight recorders, evidence of other explosives there.
Let me stop for just a sec, John. We'll come back to the notion of crime. But ABC's John McWethy is at the Pentagon. John, can you hear me? Jack, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you, Peter.
John McWethy, just go ahead and tell us what you know, what you've seen, how much information have you been able to put together?
Peter, this is one of those things that you dream of in your worst nightmares. It appears that a large jet aircraft, perhaps the size of a large passenger plane, came very low, clipping off light poles as it approached the Pentagon. It slammed into the side of the Pentagon, and it drove itself from the outer ring all the way to the inner ring. The area of the building that it went into burst into flames. There are many, many floors of destruction deep into the heart of the Pentagon. That area has now collapsed. The firemen have been there trying to put out the flames. There are obviously heavy casualties at the Pentagon. There have been ambulances and helicopters coming and going for the last hour. The area has been cordoned off. The skies above the Pentagon, there have been F-16s circling. The entire area has been evacuated. More than 20,000 people work in the Pentagon, Peter, and this is a disaster.
John, at ground level, for example, in the side of the building where the plane penetrated from the outer ring to the inner ring, do you know precisely what goes on in that section of the building?
I do not, Peter. That is not where the highest-ranking people are. The Secretary of Defense and most of the chiefs of the services are on a different side of the building, but in a way it almost doesn't matter. There are going to be many high-ranking people from the Defense Department who are going to be either injured or killed in this attack.
And John, is this something which the Pentagon is trying to take care of wholly itself? I mean, are we talking to you about a circumscribed military operation to emerge from this chaos?
It's very difficult, Peter. The FBI is here, local police are here, everyone is here trying to deal with the casualties initially and trying to make sure there isn't a second strike of any kind. That's the first inclination. That's all I can tell you at this point.
All right, let me ask you, John, because you cover intelligence and counterintelligence a lot of the time, trying to see that a second strike doesn't occur. How is the Pentagon defended in any way, and in any way similar to, for example, the anti-aircraft battery on top of the White House?
No, Peter. This Washington, D.C., because it is a democracy, has made a lot of decisions about how it is going to posture itself. And local law enforcement, FBI, and CIA have relied on intelligence as a way to defend the United States, and they're going to have to add some measures as a result of this.
And John, as it may be too chaotic at the moment to be talking to people about what is an intelligence failure this morning, and the intelligence services are going to have an enormous amount to answer for, clearly, at least in the public arena. Are you picking up anything that suggests anybody has the vaguest idea of who may have done this?
They are going back over every strand of intelligence, looking for either groups in the Middle East or anywhere else in the country. They learned a painful lesson after Oklahoma City, not to jump to conclusions. They're trying not to do this. But, Peter, there are very few organizations on the planet that could put together the kind of coordinated attack that we have seen today. That points most initial fingers at Osama bin Laden's organization that has the money and the sophistication to do this.
Okay, John, thank you very much. I don't think we should be at all surprised that it moves to the top of everybody's list in this. But John McCarthy makes a very interesting point, which we should talk to John Miller about this for a moment, which we should consider throughout the day. I remember sitting in this exact same chair at the time of the Oklahoma City bombing, and we all thought it was a Middle East attack. We all thought it was the Arabs attacking the United States, and that's where much of the violence is these days. But it was a sort of knee-jerk reaction, then it turned out to be one of our own.
That's right, and it was a conclusion that was jumped to by the law enforcement establishment because it seemed to fit the pattern of conduct, a massive truck bomb. The difference was it was stateside, yet they were certainly surprised when they learned within days, actually with a car stop of Timothy McVeigh, that it was a homegrown plot. These are bellwether events. When the World Trade Center blew up in New York City in 1993, everybody sighed and said, well, we said it couldn't happen here, and it finally has. When Oklahoma City blew up, they said we knew it could happen here, but we never thought it would be brought on by our own. This event certainly transcends either of those events by several fold. And of course, as you pointed out, people are already jumping to speculative conclusions. But whoever is behind this put together an incredibly sophisticated program. Just the idea that you would have multiple operators in multiple cities with the ability to get onto a plane with either the weaponry or false weaponry or explosives to be able to pull off a hijacking, again, probably with a locked cockpit.
Three of them, maybe.
Again, a hijacking and another hijacking and another, and maybe one that's still aloft, that you would be able to, and this is the part that has confounded me, and you touched on this, how do you make a pilot in a plane full of passengers into a suicide pilot, a kamikaze to slam into a building? And if you do not, how do you, as the terrorist, have the level of sophistication to take over the controls of a sophisticated airliner jet plane to be able to fly accurately into targets like hitting dead center into the Pentagon, which is a low building?
You heard John McCarthy saying knocking down telephone poles as it came along.
Dead hits into the World Trade Center, one at the center, one near the top. As you pointed out, there's a lot of mystery to this, confounding mystery, an incredible scope.
Let's listen to this woman quickly. Well, we try to listen to this woman, not able to get her sound. Could somebody please turn up her sound if that's possible? We are looking at, in some cases here, because of the communications difficulties, but also the communication benefits we get from our ABC affiliate here in New York City. We're getting coverage which comes from a variety of sources.
What you're seeing is West Street there, a block north of the World Trade Center. That was an emergency service police officer collapsing on the street.
Let's listen to this man. Okay. Can I just ask our director to come to us for just a second then? I think Mr. Goodman? Thank you very much. let's just continue to review that. There's a hard issue here for an enormous number of people. What you've seen on television this morning, those twin trade towers first being hit and then collapsing before our A's, has an almost distant, we talked to both Pierre and John, it has one of some distant quality to it because we're watching on television. We're so accustomed to violence on television. So accustomed, I mean, when the plane flew into one of the two towers which we saw before our eyes, you thought, well, you know, it's like the graphic artist, isn't it? So what we haven't had here yet is an appreciation of the suffering that's occurring on the streets and in those buildings.
Well, what the widening scope of the injuries, they have now notified hospitals in the outlying boroughs outside Manhattan, and they have cleared routes through the streets, covering miles for caravans of ambulances to bring the injured out as they do the triage. The lower Manhattan and central Manhattan hospitals like Bellevue quickly filled up very early on. They have now set up a system of helicopters, which they have to be very careful with because of the ban on air traffic, that everybody knows who everybody is who's flying and that there's communications between all of them to shuttle people out. The military has offered military aircraft for that kind of transport, and military surgeons have been brought to the scene. One thing unfolding right now is they've asked for gas to be shut off in that area for blocks and blocks, because after the two collapses, gas mains were opened up and there's a gas leak in the air which only fosters the danger of yet more explosions.
Exactly. Pierre?
Well, one of the things that they've been very concerned about in recent years is the notion that could hospitals deal with massive amounts of casualties like this. And now they're going to...
Let me just interrupt you for a second so we hear it as it's happening.
Just come out, we're walking.
It's just come down. The second everyone's being asked to get down, come down. The people are now panicking again.
Give him in. You can walk. You can fill it. Okay. Make the hole. Make the fucking hole. Make the fucking hole. Make the fucking hole. Fuck off.
Well, a scene that's been repeated hundreds and hundreds of, as far as we know, thousands of times. The reports in John Miller was talking about the number of hospitals and the military making its medical staff available to the citizen, to the layman hierarchy here. We've had reports from various hospitals saying that hundreds of people are burned from head to toe. One doctor at St. Vincent's Hospital in Lower Manhattan just simply said the place was crowding up very quickly by people who had been burned. And the horrifying magnitude of all this is to be reminded. I think I'm going to try to get this right, Nancy, but I think maybe as many as 50,000 people work in the immediate area of the Trade Center, of the World Trade Center, in which there are these two twin towers. Am I right on that as many as 50,000 people work there?
I don't know the figure, but the World Trade Center complex, not just the two towers, which are, over 100 stories each, but they're flanked by the World Financial Center. So there are clearly tens of thousands of people within a 2-block radius.
And John McCarthy, who called in just a short while from the Pentagon, talking about the aircraft that had penetrated the outer ring of the Pentagon to the inner ring, we're talking about the Pentagon now, had many floors of destruction and heavy casualties. It's just impossible at the moment to grasp, other than to try to aggregate the normal circumstances of how many people live and work in the immediate area. And thousands of people work in the Pentagon every day, which has now been overrun by local police, and by state authorities and by the military itself trying to take care of its own. Tony Cordesman, who's one of our military analysts, is on the phone from Washington. Tony, what can you add to all this?
Yes. Peter, can you hear me?
Yes, Tony, I can.
I think one of the things we need to understand is we've been preparing for this kind of event for nearly a decade. We've had presidential directives. It's a project called Homeland Defense, but quite frankly, what people were most worried about was the use of weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons. Well, we looked at this scenario, hijacked aircraft flying into buildings back in the 60s. It wasn't the focus of Homeland Defense activity. It wasn't something brought up on the screen of the Vice President's office, which formally is in charge with coordinating this effort.
But Tony, I know, been party to a lot of these. Is that speaker right here behind you?
Yes, I'm
Could you
afraid.
just turn around and ask somebody to turn it down?
Hold on, please. I'm on to Peter. Could you turn it down?
Thanks very much. Sorry to interrupt them because they're all
Sorry.
doing a job. But your involvement here is important because you've been involved in so much of planning and study of this operation. I don't get it. In the 1960s, yes, we looked at the possibility that people would hijack airplanes and fly into buildings. How did it get off the radar?
I think the problem, Peter, is literally we have tens of thousands of points of vulnerability. As Jack McClethy pointed earlier, it's the Pentagon. It's symbols of our national heritage, like the National Archives. It's major utilities, nuclear power plants, targets like ABC News and the networks. The problem is that anticipating all these points of them is almost impossible. There's always been this area of vulnerability, and we've always put civil liberties and civil rights before trying to deal with a comprehensive defense. This may change those priorities. It certainly is something short, if not actually at the level of an act of war.
And Tony, you have seen us this morning, or heard us this morning, go through the ritual of reciting that somebody had claimed responsibility, someone had denied responsibility. The Palestinian Authority in the person of Yasser Arafat was very quick to come along and offer condolences to the people of the United States, to put as much distance between himself, because he gets blamed for a lot in the Middle East, certainly by the Israelis. Do you have any feel for how complicated an operation this is and who might be able to mount it, or are we just blowing in the wind at the moment?
You're not blowing in the wind at all, Peter. This is so complicated an operation that one reason we weren't ready is that no one believed there was an organization with either the intention or the capability to execute something like this. People talk about bin Laden's group, but it's an umbrella group. It is the elements under it that would have had to do it, not bin Laden himself. We have talked about Iraq, but Iraq's operations have never been particularly sophisticated. We've talked about Iran, but while we can identify that the Iranian leadership was involved in Al-Khobar, we've never seen anything this ambitious. And groups outside the Middle East, like the Japanese Red Brigades, have never come close to this level of operation. I think it's also important to note that we talked earlier about bin Laden being Arab. Bin Laden's operations now have many elements that are not Arab. They're Islamist extremists. They involve groups from countries like Pakistan and other elements. And what we've never seen is a level of coordination among all of these different groups that would lead us to prepare.
Okay, Tony, thank you very much. Very, very grateful to have you here and to remind us all that what has been happening to us all, in terms of being witnesses today to this, and everybody's now gets deeply emotional about the people who've been involved. Again, remind you that many thousands of people work in the Twin Trade Towers in New York City. Many thousands of people that work in the Pentagon. There have been 2 aircraft at least today which have gone down with passenger loads on board, and in fact there has been a 3rd crash in Pennsylvania, which I shall bring you up to date on in just a moment. But we've had a written statement from American Airlines this morning, and let me just read it to you, or parts of it as it come. American Airlines confirms it lost 2 aircraft in what it describes as tragic incidents this morning. There was Flight 11, which was a Boeing 767 en route from Boston to Los Angeles with 81 passengers, 9 flight attendants, and 2 pilots on board. That aircraft was hijacked, to the best of our knowledge, and flown into the trade towers in New York. And Flight 77 a Boeing 757 offering from Washington Dulles to Los Angeles with 58 passengers and 4 flight attendants and 2 pilots. That aircraft is a little more uncertain. That is not a huge, it's a big aircraft, 757, but we're not certain whether that's the one that went into the Pentagon or whether it's one of the other aircraft that went into the Twin Trade Towers. But the government has now shut down the entire air traffic system in the United States. And we learned just a while ago, for example, that all international flights heading to Canada were now going to be, for the United States were going to be diverted to Canada. And the Canadians have now shut down their entire air traffic system as well. A reminder of how close the two nations live together and how Canadian airports from one end of the country to the other are within an hour's flight or less in some cases of major American targets. So now let's get involved with one more crash to start with. ABC's Lisa Stark, who covers aviation, is on the phone with us from Washington, or at least I believe in our bureau. Lisa, can you hear me?
Actually, Peter, I'm in Seattle today, ironically, for an aviation conference.
Okay, well
can you
then,
hear me, Peter?
I can indeed, Lisa, and tell me what you know.
Well, what I know is that the flight that went down outside Philadelphia, I believe, in Pittsburgh, was United Airlines Flight 93. It was a Boeing 757. It was en route from Newark to San Francisco. I do not know how many people were on board that plane. United is also saying now that they are concerned about a further flight that apparently is still missing. Flight 175, it is a Boeing 767. It was scheduled from Boston to Los Angeles. That flight apparently is still unaccounted for, according to officials from United. So at least we believe there's at least one more plane that may still be flying around, in U.S. airspace. Obviously, Peter, I've also learned that one of the planes that went into the World Trade Tower was tracked by the FAA. They knew, I don't know if they knew it was hijacked or if they just knew something was wrong. Obviously, it had deviated from its flight path. They were able to track it on radar, and they did track it to Lower Manhattan. That is the latest we know about the flight.
Lisa, this may seem an awfully dumb question, but given the fact that the airlines, the major airlines, operate in such an intensely coordinated way, at least with their own operation centers, how is United Flight 175, a 767 from Boston to Los Angeles, thought to be missing and unaccounted for?
Well, all United is saying is that they are, quote, concerned about that flight. What I believe is that probably that flight was hijacked as well. Where it is right now, I'm sure perhaps the FAA, the FBI, and those folks know where it is. We are not being told, but there may still be another plane flying out there that has not yet crashed or landed or whatever will happen to it. But that flight is apparently at least unaccounted for at this time as far as public release. I'm sure someone knows where that flight is.
Yeah, okay, thanks very much then. Lisa Stark in Seattle today. I thought she was in Washington, covers aviation for us. Barbara Starr, one of our principal reporters at the Pentagon, I think is on the line as well. Barbara? Barbara, do you hear me? Barbara Starr?
Yes, Peter, I'm standing outside the Pentagon. About 10 or 15 minutes ago, we saw 50 to 75 military personnel move onto the helipad. They are stretcher bearer volunteers. They have been assembled to go in and recover any potentially dead or wounded. And we have talked to an eyewitness who was down on the helipad earlier this morning, where the fire is, of course, still ongoing. He reported seeing more than a dozen wounded personnel earlier this morning. We have seen ambulances carry people off. About an hour ago, we saw emergency medical personnel bringing out a woman and a small child in their arms. So the situation here remains quite unsettled.
Can you describe a little more generally what unsettled mean? Is it calm? Is there chaos?
We have had periods of what can only be described as chaos. About 15 minutes ago, security personnel came through again and told us to start running, to move back, that there was another aircraft moving up the Potomac River from the south at a high rate of speed. Well, that apparently did not occur, and we have now moved back to our original camera position. So the police are quite at a point of quite high tension here this morning, and any little ripple is having them move people back to stay away from the building. They are extremely concerned about another attack and a potential additional explosion. They are taking every precaution.
Understandable. Barbara, the portion of the building that was breached when the aircraft crashed into it, do you know what happens in that part of the building?
Well, we're looking at it right now. Fire trucks are still pouring water more than an hour or better.
Vulnerability in a democratic society.
After the explosion, onto the flames. This has occurred where the helipad is, a helicopter pad with a small control tower where military helicopters, and including Air Force One helicopters, take off and land regularly. A very senior military official told us he heard an explosion on the 5th floor of the Pentagon, and he believes that that's where the impact was. But looking at the side of the building, you can see smoke and flames, and the building is singed, literally top to bottom. Water is continuing to be poured on the flames by fire companies.
Thank you, Barbara Starr, very much. We've just seen a helicopter flying over the center portion of the District of Columbia. Maybe we can get another glimpse at that. It's gone out of frame now. I am wondering now whether or not we are not possibly looking at the president returning to the White House. Claire Shipman, you've got a pretty decent vantage point over the White House. Is that possibly what we're looking at? Okay, Claire Shipman will get to as much. She's got a very good vantage point over the White House. It does not by any means look like the traditional arrival of the president from Andrews Air Force Base in a Marine helicopter. And quite frankly, everybody on the roof, with a few remaining people on the roof of the building now. This is a permanent guard. I think we're all in the country familiar with the fact that this is a permanent military installation on the top of the White House, as there is one of the really intense perimeters around that. But I think they would not have been quite so relaxed if the president was returning to the White House. And you heard John Cochran report from Florida a while ago that there is nobody's told him where the president is going to land on his way back. In fact, he does traditionally land at Andrews Air Force Base, and we have no idea precisely where he is going to land. But there is no doubt at the moment that authorities are on alert from coast to coast still. All air traffic halted. All high-profile buildings in New York City, certainly in the District of Columbia, all of the national buildings have been evacuated. It's certainly been true in Chicago. The Sears Tower of Chicago was evacuated. So were the tallest skyscrapers in Boston, Cleveland, and Minneapolis, and the Space Needle as well in Seattle was closed. Military bases all across the country went on alert. On a variety of stages alert. In Washington, military personnel were put on what's called alert level Delta, which is the highest possible alert status, and military personnel throughout the country were put on Charlie threat level. For people who follow those things, we say them often without knowing what they mean, but they're both pretty high states of alert. There was extra security put in place at the Department of Energy's nuclear weapons and research complex in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. They put in extra security at the Los Alamos National Lab in New Mexico, and among the other places at Fort Detrick in Frederick, Maryland. This is to give you some sense of the magnitude. We're looking at a limited amount of picture of New York City and Washington, but let me go on with this list of what people did across the country today. In Louisiana, the state police urged all petrochemical and pipeline companies to be on alert. In this particular tension, a target which people who study terrorism believed which was vulnerable. In Los Angeles, all of the police in Los Angeles went on tactical alert and mobilized their anti-terrorist division. You recall before the World Trade Fair, the World Trade meeting that was held up in Seattle, one of the last times that the system really worked and everybody efficiently was when they caught a guy coming across the border from British Columbia in Canada with a view to to blowing up the Space Needle, I think it was at the time, in the Space Needle in Seattle.
That's what they originally suspected, and then later updated it.
Turned it into something in Los Angeles.
When he began to cooperate, he admitted his plan was to set off a massive bomb inside the terminal of LAX, Los Angeles Airport.
That's right. And what I remember at the time about that, John, which is why everybody in the country is so on edge today, is, you know, here was a guy who was picked up by one agent at one border crossing into the country because he was sweating.
One alert agent who didn't like the fact that he was panicking.
Yeah, okay.
Under questioning.
Let me go back now to the World Trade Center. Just to finish this very quickly. Under orders from the FAA, airports nationwide are now closed all across the country. Anybody's just connecting with the world today and you're planning to go anywhere on an aircraft from one place to another, you can just forget it. So let's go back to the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan on the west side and talk to Don Daler. Don.
Over for New York yet. As you know, this is one of the most densely constructed pieces of real estate in the world, and when the Twin Towers collapsed, it appears that they ignited fires on surrounding buildings. I'm seeing a huge amount of smoke. Just about 15 minutes ago, there was a phalanx of firemen, I would say probably about 50 firemen, moving deliberately into this black cloud of smoke. They disappeared completely into it. Then about 5 minutes ago, there was quite a bit of activity as a number of police officers started moving back individuals as well as firemen who were with their fire trucks away. So they moved the line of demarcation back away from that area. And I can see at least two buildings look to be partially involved. Just from my vantage point, I'm about 4 blocks away from where the Twin Towers once stood. Right before the second tower collapsed, when you and John were talking about the concerns over that possibility, Mayor Rudolph Giuliani walked right past me here on Church Street and Duane Street, again about 4 blocks from that area, moving his entourage out of that region. And then just moments later was when the collapse happened. There was a complete cessation of ambulances and any kind of emergency traffic in this area for about 5 minutes. And then slowly I saw 1 or 2 ambulances trickling out of this incredible cloud of dust with debris on top of them. Some of them had broken windshields. There was a police car that came by that looked like the top had been almost completely stove in. And that's one of the most disconcerting aspects this morning has been on this avenue that has been opened up, Church Street. There's just been a trickling of emergency vehicles coming out of that scene and towards the hospitals. I'm not sure how much they've been trapped down in that area or whether they moved away and are going to some of the other area hospitals that don't come by here. But I have not seen anywhere near the number of ambulances leaving the site that one would expect.
Don, let me ask you this. Do you have, and I realize this is a tough one to ask you to speculate about, after the attack occurred on the aircraft, the first aircraft attack on one tower and then the second one, how many people managed to get out of that place before they collapsed? Have you any idea? Would you see a large number?
I saw a river of people at first running when the first attack happened. There were screams. A lot of people were looking up in shock. And then about, I would say, a minute and a half later, there was a steady stream of people moving from closer to that area, running up the streets. Then, of course, as I guess is human nature, a lot of people stopped, feeling that they were maybe far enough away that it was safe, started looking up, talking, pointing, and then the second plane hit. And that, again, caused another stream of panic. As the police started to respond and started to try to clear the streets, there was a very calm, organized evacuation of the southern part of Manhattan. I saw no panic whatsoever. It was very calm. The police were directing traffic, getting all the cars out of this area, getting all the people north. But when the first tower, the one that actually was that you saw, was the second tower hit, but the first tower to collapse fell, then it was mass chaos. And there were thousands of people running up the streets. This billowing cloud of dust and debris came washing up over here, four blocks away, which only exacerbated the chaos of the moment. And then from then on, from the time that the first tower collapsed, there was just the street here, Church Street, was just full of people covered in dust, holding their handkerchiefs or papers over their mouths to try to breathe, moving northward away from this area. That stream trickled out, And then when the second building collapsed, once again, there were more people. But this time, when the second building collapsed, I witnessed firemen who were helping one another, struggling up the street, covered in debris. There was a police officer who was being carried by two other police officers trying to get out of that area. So there was obviously a lot of collateral damage with the people around that area. I would say even not just at the base of it, but for them to have gotten to my point that quickly, they would have been injured probably 2.5 blocks away from where the towers fell.
Don, thanks very much. Don't go away, because you've helped us appreciate at ground level what, as I said before, seems almost surrealistic when you look at it on television. In terms of people getting out of the trade towers, do you have any sense at all, have you heard anything even anecdotally from the cops about how many people managed to get out of the building before they collapsed?
No, absolutely not. But you can imagine that the World Trade Centers, I'm not sure how many elevators exactly they have, but I have been in those buildings, and I think there are around 20 elevators in each. If they shut down immediately, you can imagine the people who would be streaming down the fire escapes and the stairwells. There's also, I don't know if it was the case now, but I do know that one of the towers had a major elevator that went all the way to the top that was malfunctioning and has been malfunctioning for at least a month. They've been having a lot of trouble with that. Not that that would have made any kind of difference, of course, once those elevators shut down. As soon as I imagine the fire alarms go on and that kind of thing, it's de rigueur that the elevators are not to be used in that situation. If the elevators go all the way to the top, and that's where the extent of the damage was at the very top of these, there's probably no way that anyone on the lower floors was able to use elevators. So they were all going down the stairwells, and one can only hope that there was quick enough reaction that they did get clear away, that they did not stop at the base.
Thank you, Don, very much. You know, somebody said, looking at the Pentagon this morning, that it reminded them of World War II. Clearly a person too young to remember World War II. Scenes, you can feel absolutely clear that you're looking at the results of the United States at war with angry and vicious people who will do in the future, as they have in the past, whatever they can to get at the United States, this huge presence in the world, with any number of enemies in the world, with any number of people who feel the United States has messed up their lives or their countries or their movements or impeded them from something. And so, in fairness, without being too carried away with it, we are looking at pictures from a war zone this morning. Not a picture, something that looks like a war zone, looked like an old war zone, but it's a picture of a current war zone in this endless battle between the United States and its enemies. Usually small groups of enemies. We're talking into countries to some extent here, but we're talking about the most unconventional form of warfare that man engages in, which is terrorism. Designed to cause terror, designed to have an impact on the psychology of Americans, designed to show that the United States is vulnerable. What better expresses American vulnerability than to watch these two symbols of American commerce and government and pride at the lower end of Manhattan collapsing in upon themselves after having been attacked by two hijacked aircraft. That is what it looks like at the moment. Looking out, this from the top of the KABC building, and we're like 60, 70 blocks, 60 blocks north, more than 60 blocks north of the trade centers, and as we look down, that's what they look like under normal circumstances. We can see them from almost anywhere in the city, and people go to the top of them on a regular basis so that they can see the huge surrounding area, including, I might add, right in their face, the Statue of Liberty on a day like today. And they are both gone. Now, just to deal with the possibility of the missing United Airlines flight, the mayor of Cleveland, Michael White, says that a Boeing 767 out of Boston has made an emergency landing at Cleveland Hopkins International Airport because of concerns that it may have a bomb aboard. There is some possibility that may be the missing United flight, but we do not know. But anybody who's in an aircraft this morning and made an emergency landing safely is probably one hugely relieved person at the moment. I want to go back to Washington. Claire Shipman is just across Lafayette Park from the White House. It's a traditional place in which we broadcast from when we're covering White House and Washington affairs. Claire, do we know where the president is at the moment?
Well, Peter, that's what we've been trying to figure out. I've been told by sources that Air Force One hasn't landed yet. What we're trying to figure out is, as you were talking about earlier, where that plane will land and where the president will go. The Secret Service have essentially told me, we have an emergency plan in place for exactly this sort of thing, and of course, we're not going to tell you where we take our protectees, including the president. And there was some question about whether he would even land, as he normally does, at Andrews Air Force Base. Now, there is a small press pool traveling with him on Air Force One. I've been told they may stick fairly close with him once he does land, so we may learn something more. But in addition, the entire staff of the White House...
But he should live on the south lawn of the White House.
Vulnerability in a democratic society.
The White House and the old Executive Office building, State Department has been scattered around town. There's no reaching anybody from the NSC, the press office. They're all trying to set up temporary offices, and at some point they may have them up and running. But right now, there's very little information about how this government is running and from where it's being run.
And of course, Claire, these are all really, truly important psychological factors in the war between the United States and those people who would harm it, because if the government is seen to be in, I don't mean to suggest disarray, but seen to be uncertain, then this is going to simply make America's enemies happier.
Oh, absolutely. This is exactly the sort of response they would like to have. And of course, this government doesn't make this sort of evacuation decision lightly. Remember, you were talking earlier about the Oklahoma City bombing. They didn't evacuate at that point. We all stayed in the White House because they didn't feel it was necessary, and they don't want to do it unless they believe it is absolutely necessary.
I have been saying, perhaps you will think too blithely, that the president is no safer than he is in the White House. Is that the conventional wisdom among the current White House press corps?
You mean...
That the president wants to be in the safest place? He's in the White House, unless he's in a bunker somewhere.
Well, I think that is normally true, but again, in a situation like this where it's obvious that they're just not sure what's going to happen, they believe there are safer places for him. The Secret Service told us absolutely they have places they believe are safer for their protectees than the White House. Remember, we talked about this earlier, but just a couple of years ago, a plane landed on the White House lawn.
Right.
So mistakes do happen in terms of the protection of the president, and they don't want to take any chances at this point.
Thanks very much, Claire. But one more question. We try to track the political leadership in the city generally, and I realize this is in large measure a serious effort, but also something of an academic exercise. Where are the leaders of the Senate and the House at the moment?
Well, we've been told that the leaders of the Senate, at least, have also been, according to a plan, taken to safe destinations, and we can't find out where. Colin Powell, we're told, is on his way back from Peru. He would also be taken to that sort of safe destination, presumably with the president.
Okay, thanks very much, Claire. People at home, I think, know by now that we get information from a variety of ways, and here's a piece of information about the president's advisors that Claire may or may not be party to. That they're preparing a list of options, including closing the nation's borders. Now, we all know, as the struggle over legal and illegal immigration and the desire that people have to come to the United States, how difficult that is. But the notion, we've now got all the airports in the country is closed down. We've got all the Canadian authorities pretty much mounting the same kind of operation there, at least temporarily, to see that nobody uses a Canadian airport in order to get an aircraft off the ground to come in this direction. Customs, U.S. Customs, has moved to something they call Threat Level 1, which is the highest state of alert that the Customs Department has, or the Department of Treasury, of course, has. All air and marine assets are now on alert. We think covered that before in terms of the state of the military. The borders are not closed, and we are told by immigration and by customs at this point there have been no unusual incidents at any of the border crossings, either between the United States and Mexico or between the United States and Canada. And several, it seems like it's not very long ago, it's only been 3 hours, almost to the minute, since this actually happened. And early on, we made the observation that in some respects this was not in some respects, this is the most serious attack on the U.S. mainland since Pearl Harbor. And I notice now that at least one senator in Washington, Senator Chuck Hagel of Nebraska, referring to that attack 60 years ago, which so surprised the nation, has now called this the second Pearl Harbor. And So much, of course, is different in the world, and yet one should not be surprised if this comes to be referred to that in the days and in the weeks ahead. We've managed to put together a couple of pieces of information on tape, and one of them is, I believe, a quick comment and a quick comment only from Mayor Giuliani of New York. Can we just roll that, please?
Hold on. Hands right this way. Get up. Put your mask on. Put your mask on. Don't put it down.
Mayor, what's the situation right now?
The situation is that 2 airplanes have attacked, apparently. You can't go to sleep. Why? You should not go to sleep. All right, well then let's go north then.
You know especially what happened to airplanes?
Come with us. Come with us. Well, let's talk a little later, okay?
Okay. City Hall. Okay.
You could never ever underestimate how important the political leaders are and their respective communities are to the country at this moment. Mayor Giuliani, who's coming to the end of his term in office, down there, very characteristic fashion of him, John Miller, to go immediately to the scene. Some mayors have not, and it has cost them politically, but you see in that early picture, maybe that's an hour or so ago, in which he's just caught above as much guard as anybody else.
And he's covered with dust. He's walking with his principal bodyguards. The other man wearing the mask, who stopped him from speaking, obviously for security reasons, wanting to get him further out of the area, was his police commissioner, Bernard Carrick, who, as the mayor was about to stop and give a briefing, said, no, we have to go further out, concerned for, other damage and his safety.
Okay, Senator Schumer of New York is, I believe, on the phone. Senator, are you there, and can I ask where you are?
Yeah, I am in Washington, Peter.
Good. Obviously, you, sir, have something to say, and here's the space.
Well, I just, we're all just totally shocked here. Probably there are millions of New Yorkers who are in my position. My wife works... I'm in Washington, but my wife works a quarter of a mile from the World Trade Center. My daughter goes to
the South Lawn
of the World Trade Center.
Have you spoken to them both?
I did speak finally to my daughter. I spoke to my wife earlier this morning, and I spoke to my daughter about a half hour ago. Both were obviously extremely shaken by what's happened here.
Senator, you know precisely that 50,000 people work in the World Trade Center. There are 155 businesses in there, and 80,000 people visit the World Trade Center every day. Can you give us some sense of your feeling about the magnitude of this, your knowledge of the magnitude of this?
It leaves you almost speechless. I was going through each floor, and I know people on almost every other floor, and I'm sure that's true of so many people here. This is such a dastardly act aimed at the heart of America and the heart of New York, and it is... You don't even know what to think. It is just so awful.
Senator, I apologize for
We're going to have to redouble our efforts because terrorism leaves nobody.
Senator, I apologize for interrupting you. I really do. This is an American Airlines news conference, which we do want to have. We'll come back to.
Not that I'm aware of. We've been in business here 26 years, I guess. Have we ever done this? Closed the air side to all the terminal buildings? This is unprecedented.
Yes, sir. We have not done it. It is this level of security has not happened before.
We hear from the aviation community that there is a rumor that military jets are escorting a commercial aircraft to this airport right now. Can either of you comment about that?
I have no earthly idea, sir.
Mr. Jim, do you know anything about that?
I would assume that since all of the aircraft that are due into DFW have landed, there are no military escorts. Now, whether there was a military escort provided to them or not, we're unaware of that.
We can take about 2 more questions, and we're going to have to...
For the implosion, what are you going to carry on with that?
We have canceled the implosion party set for this Saturday, and we will look at where we go from here.
All the flights that were diverted, where did they go?
Well, they could have gone a variety of places. We don't have all that specific information. Typically, when a plane is diverted, it's diverted to the Category X airport, the largest airport that is closest to where they're going, but we don't have specific information.
Planes on the ground right now that are sitting there on the runway. Any indication that perhaps terrorists were using one of those planes?
Have no idea whatsoever.
Now, when you say shutting down the air side, can you just articulate that a little more?
Certainly.
Is this the... Just tell us what you mean by that.
Right. What that means is when you go through your security checkpoint for those customers who are used to going to the airport, anything on the opposite side of that is called that secure side of the airport. And those are the areas that are being closed to the public. They are still keeping open those areas in front of that. They call that the ATO area, or where you can check your bags, that sort of thing, to accommodate any customers' questions and things that might find their way to the airport.
So all folks who are stranded are being moved out, essentially?
Indeed, and being accommodated, those, based upon what the plans are by their respective air carriers, be accommodated in local hotels and things of that nature.
That's all. I'm sorry. One more question, and we're going to have to get back to our business.
I talked with passengers out at the terminal. They said that people who were coming off the planes are having their bags searched or their luggage comes out of the airport.
That's possible.
That is possible on the part of the air carrier.
Okay, thank you. We'll be back to you. I think the most important thing to take away is that there is no specific threat to this airport, and rest assured that our DPS folks will keep you alerted if anything else is to occur. Thank you.
What time should we expect another?
Well, there you hear the comments from two officials. I have to be perfectly honest, not sure who they are, whether they work for American Airlines or they work for the airport in Dallas, but they were in Dallas today, and they say at the end of that news conference there is no specific threat to that airport, which will be reassuring to people who are around the airport, but anybody who's wanting to fly anywhere in the country at the moment is unable to do so anyway. But the conditions in the country are of such a confusing nature at the moment that stuff just comes in all the time. We've had authorities in Lexington, Kentucky tell our affiliate there, WTVQ, just a short while ago, that as a plane is missing from radar in their airspace, and it is simply going to take time in order to sort out whether or not we're looking or at an operation or somehow witnessing or being on the edges of an operation that is continuing to unfold in various parts of the country. We still indeed have a missing aircraft, or a missing or not accounted for aircraft from United Airlines. We had a crash near Pittsburgh here today, about which we have only that knowledge, no understanding whatsoever whether or not it is relevant to the others. We do know that the president and the vice president, and interestingly enough, former presidents, are all now in secure locations. That's Pierre Thomas, our Justice Department reporter, connecting into his sources there to tell us all that. ABC's John McKenzie, who's out on the streets of New York, has spoken to the New York City Fire Department officials, and they report many missing firemen, perhaps as many as 200. And John Miller, you've been such assistance here this morning that will come as no surprise to you, because you worked these streets for so long, both before you went back to being a reporter as an official with the government and with the police department.
That's right.
And the fire department stays there. I've seen the fire department all my professional life stay there till the bitter end.
Well, you know, they are the people who are always running in when everybody else is running out, and in this case would have been the front line of the evacuating force for the World Trade Center. The fire department has a set plan for a disaster at the World Trade Center. It's an automatic second alarm, which brings more than 175 firefighters. This, of course, brought hundreds more, and their job is to go through the building and bring those people out. And there's really no telling at what stage of the evacuation they were at, or how many of them were still inside when the first building collapsed or the second building collapsed.
I remember 30 some odd years ago, first coming to New York, and there was a building that collapsed, and the firefighters were ultimately the ones to die on almost the very first night I was here at ABC all those years ago. As you say, everybody's going one way and they're going the other way. John, I know that you're listening a lot to the network. By this I mean the police network, and one assumes we're not interrupting and intruding on them. I think that's pretty certain. Give us the general tenor of things at the moment.
Right now, it's a situation that's vastly calmed down. As you hear the operations, which I've been monitoring since the beginning, their voices are now level. This is much more about organizing an incredible crime scene second, but first, organizing a massive transport of casualties. They literally have passenger ferry boats, police launches, and other vessels standing by to ferry people away to outer boroughs, helicopters to do the same thing. It's really a tremendous effort to triage the people who are injured, to decide who's viable, who can be saved, who needs immediate attention, who can wait, to categorize them and tag them as such, and then to designate whether they can stand a long ride or just a short ride to the nearest available medical
of the White
vulnerability in a democratic society.
We should look at the South Lawn.
What's going on, and that's an incredibly large effort. On the other side, there's the investigation, which is unfolding, processing probably the largest crime scene in U.S. history, certainly larger than the Oklahoma City bombing, or even the first World Trade Center bombing, or in this case, because of the size of those two buildings, the twin embassy bombings in East Africa.
Yeah, and that's the Pentagon we're looking at this morning. And I'm sorry, but we have more bad news. Lisa Stark, who covers aviation from us, reports in from Seattle that 2 United flights have now crashed. Now, just so we don't lose track of the numbers, we told you the United Flight 93 going from New York to San Francisco crashed outside Pittsburgh today. We believe now, according to our aviation sources, the United Flight 175, which was a 767 destined to go from Boston to Los Angeles, has crashed, and we do not know where. So we have 4 major commercial aircraft which have been involved in either accidents or violence today. We have the 2 at the trade towers in New York City. We're not certain, but we believe both those are somehow connected to American Airlines, but we're not sure of that, absolutely sure. And that news conference in Dallas a few minutes ago didn't shed much light on the subject. And we have 2 United Airlines flights involved in crashes. We do not know the circumstances of those crashes. One of them flying from New York, just outside New York, to San Francisco, and the other flying from Boston to Los Angeles. And we may or may not have another aircraft, because we have no certainty yet what the aircraft was, who it belonged to, really what size it was, that penetrated the outer ring of the Pentagon this morning, right through to the inner ring of the Pentagon's courtyard there, and caused what ABC's Jack McQuethy called heavy casualties there. So we have 4 significant commercial aircraft carrying, in some cases, well more than 100 passengers who've all been involved in acts of violence on purpose or otherwise today. And Mayor Giuliani, Mayor of New York, who will probably get a better feel of this before anybody else at the moment, has now described a tremendous number of lives lost in the New York attack on the New York trade towers, and it doesn't come as any great surprise to anybody. The mayor begins to give us some sense of magnitude which is beyond that which we are merely speculating and or talking about, even though we know that many lives have been lost. And ABC's John McKenzie, who's just a couple of blocks away from the World Trade Center at a makeshift fire command center. Look at that again. I mean, it is stunning. John McQuethy at that makeshift fire command center has had a battalion commander tell him that as many as 200 firefighters are principally unaccounted for. So it is no wonder that all across the country today, at airports and at public sites, many which have been closed from the west all the way across to the east, people are holding their breath. Don't wish to be melodramatic about it, are holding their breath as to whether or not there is one more, or should I say, another incident to come. And that was because the shock was so profound watching on television, as we did this morning, to see the second aircraft come in and crash into the other of the twin trade towers. There it is, which have now both collapsed. And it is, in some ways, a reminder of what happened when the Challenger exploded. And the constant repetition of the explosion of the Challenger on Challenger space shuttle just drove it into our collective consciousness all across the nation. What we had witnessed together, though were clearly unable to feel in the same way as those people in the immediate area. I just want to pick up some other reaction coming from around the country and around the world. It's very interesting, the reaction we've had immediately, officially, from the highest ranks of the Palestinian Authority and from Afghanistan, I think we can hear Chairman Arafat, Yasser Arafat, in just a moment, but the Taliban ambassador to Pakistan, it is in Afghanistan where the United States believes Osama bin Laden has been most carefully given sanctuary, if not protected by the Taliban. But the Taliban ambassador to Pakistan has condemned what he called terrorist attacks on the United States on Tuesday. He said in a dispatch from Reuters out of Islamabad in Pakistan, this is a terrorism act and we strongly condemn it. And then from Kabul itself, the capital of Afghanistan, a spokesman for the rulers there said that the Saudi dissident, Osama bin Laden is a Saudi Arabian citizen, could not be responsible for a spate of terror attacks in the United States. I don't understand that particularly, but here's the quote from him. It says, what happened in the United States was not a job of ordinary people. It could have been the work of governments. Osama bin Laden cannot do this work, neither us, said the Taliban spokesman to the Reuters news agency in Kandahar, which is a city in the southern part of Afghanistan. This could have been the act of either internal enemies of the United States or its major rivals. Now, there are a couple things. John Miller talked to me about this because you've been to Afghanistan. You went to see Osama bin Laden. In every organization, anywhere in the world where governments or organizations have been somehow connected to terrorism in the United States mind, acting real or not, people are just waiting. There's going to be some kind of response to this. When Osama bin Laden blew up those embassies, I guess it was before you went into Afghanistan, they attacked his camps. They didn't get him.
They sent 75 cruise missiles at $1 million apiece into his camps based on intelligence that he would be meeting there with his leadership.
Right.
He was not there, and they didn't get him. They destroyed his camps. I think that at the time or point that the government and the Bush administration identifies, not to the standard, and this is the way they've been working, not to the standard you would need to prove in court, but to the satisfaction of the administration that they know who's responsible. They will not deal with this as a criminal matter first, but as a military one first, and retaliate against someone somewhere. Too early to say who. One of the things about bin Laden that is so misunderstood, and his name has come up a few times today, is how he actually operates. More so than launching these operations himself at his direction from his own organization. And there are instances where he's charged with doing exactly that. In many more of the cases, especially of operations they shut down, the U.S. government takes the position that he's basically a foundation, that any terrorist group can approach him and say, we want to go to work. He'll provide the training, the financing, and then send them off to do their work, essentially with grant money, seed money, training, logistical support. So it doesn't necessarily have to be him to have his fingerprints on it.
Fires are still burning in the Pentagon, no surprise there. As John McCreffy and Barbara Starr both reported for us, this building penetrated the outer ring of the Pentagon and set many offices on fire on a variety of levels, and there are about 6 or 7 stories. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stories anyway in the Pentagon today. In at least one section, they are alight. And as I said a couple of times, the Palestinian president, Yasser Arafat, who's deeply engaged in a war now with the Israeli government, has also reacted very quickly to this today to express, to be perfectly honest, I haven't heard what he said, but so let's hear what he said now. This is the Palestinian president, Yasser Arafat.
First of all, I am offering my condolences, the condolences of the Palestinian people to the American President, President Bush, to his government, to the American people for this terrible act. We are completely shocked. Completely shocked. Unbelievable.
Now, that's the Palestinian president, chairman of the Palestine Liberation Organization, Yasser Arafat, who, as I think everybody who watches the news or reads the news these days understands, is in a very, very bitter war with the Israelis, and in which terrorism has been a factor. Palestinians see what the Israelis do to them as terrorism, and certainly the Israelis and much of the world see the Palestinian and other suicide bombers who've attacked inside Israel to be terrorism of the most gruesome order, no question about that. And so we should not be surprised, as on previous circumstances, to see Chairman Arafat expressing his condolences, but other Palestinians who believe the United States is responsible for what Israel is doing to the Palestinians, or at least complicit and is certainly supplying the Israelis arms, will be happy to see this attack of the White
vulnerability in a democratic society in
the United States today. So take a look at a scene from Jerusalem not too long ago, in which there is some celebration that the powerful United States has been harmed, has been seen to be vulnerable, has been hurt, I suppose, in the broadest sense of the word. And the people who go off to do this sort of thing, both in the Middle East now, you must remember that a vast majority of the population of the Middle East now, in all countries, is under 21, much of it under 15, certainly under 17, and the kind of tensity and intention, if one presumes this terrorism, one shouldn't, this terrorism has had its genesis or had its roots somewhere in the Middle East, or at least in people who are opposed, are just brimming with anger at the United States. And we are now becoming more experienced with the notion that there are young men, for the most part, who are prepared to blow themselves up along with everybody else in terms, if they can be a service to the cause, and they believe, as to some people believe about Islam, that they will, by sacrificing themselves, go on to another place. It's an unfair comment on Islam in some respects, but it is certainly a motivating factor. The hatred of the United States, and the hatred of the United States is a patron of Israel. Whether you're from Afghanistan, or whether you're from Iran, Iraq, or inside the Palestinian territories, is so intense at some levels, and has become more intense in recent months, that a great many people will not be surprised at this attack today, though, like everybody else, will be amazed at the magnitude and success of it. John McCarthy at the Pentagon. John.
Peter, we are standing outside the Pentagon at this point. It has been already a long morning for rescue workers and police here. One eyewitness I talked to, who was on this busy highway outside the Pentagon this morning, said he saw an airplane coming directly over his head. It was an American Airlines plane. He could see the number on the plane. He could almost see the passengers inside as it went along the highway, started clipping off the high wires and the different light poles along the highway, and slammed directly into the side of the Pentagon. As we said earlier, Peter, the aircraft penetrated deep inside the Pentagon. It is organized in rings from the E-ring on the outside. It penetrated all the way into the A-ring in the inner part of the Pentagon. After it burned for a number of minutes, a part of the building collapsed. By the time rescue workers could get in there, the destruction was just terrific.
John, do you have any sense of the casualties?
We don't have any sense, Peter, except the size of the medical operation that has been set up here is enormous. They are anticipating the casualties. Certainly the injured will be in the hundreds. I certainly don't want to speculate on those killed.
And John, it's a little hard to get a sense of the size sometimes for the picture. Can you describe, maybe in feet or in yards, how big a penetration this is?
The roof is collapsed, Peter. There is a chasm in the side of the Pentagon that is probably 200 or 300 feet across. From the roof of the Pentagon, there is this huge V shape that has collapsed. You can see deep inside the Pentagon from the street now.
This is into the inner courtyard of the Pentagon itself.
It's into the innermost ring of the Pentagon, Peter. I have not been able to get into the courtyard, but I was told that the penetration was all the way into the deepest ring of the Pentagon.
And John, the office building, the Pentagon is about, what, 6 stories high?
It's 5 stories above ground, Peter, and several stories below. Clearly the damage is primarily above ground, but also some of those in the lower offices. I was sitting in the Pentagon when the attack happened. I was on the opposite side of the building. It shook the entire building. It was very clear that something terrible had happened. There was chaos immediately after the attack, Peter. Secretary of Defense, I walked out with the Deputy Secretary of Defense. The Marine Corps Commandant couldn't get out the door because security had locked it. It was chaos.
Okay, John, and the fires are still burning at the moment, we believe?
They are still burning. They are mostly oil fires, it appears, Peter. The fire hoses have been on the various fires for the last several
But you look at the south lawn of the White
hours, so they're beginning to put them out. But obviously there is still heavy gray smoke coming out of that portion of the Pentagon that was so terribly damaged.
John, there are a couple of aircraft at least around the country today which are still unaccounted for. You gave a very clear description earlier of how this aircraft had approached the Pentagon, but did anybody able to identify it as an aircraft associated with an airline?
Absolutely, Peter. The eyewitness I talked to looked up and said it was an American Airlines plane. I saw it clear as could be. It went right over the top of my car and clipped a pole right in front of where my car was.
Thank you very much, John McCarthy. I actually think that you may have said that earlier, and I simply lost it in terms, just lost it. And so we now know that it was, from at least one eyewitness there, it was an American Airlines aircraft which crashed into the Pentagon. So let me just try to get some grasp on the airplane. We have two United flights, a 757, which was on its way from New York to San Francisco, which crashed near Pittsburgh. We have a United flight which crashed from Boston to Los Angeles, United 175, and we do not know where that aircraft has crashed or been crashed as of now. And we have these two American flights, one from Boston to Los Angeles, which is a 767 with 81 passengers and 11 crew on board, talking about almost 100 people on American Flight 11. And American Flight 77, which was scheduled from Washington to Los Angeles, with 58 passengers and 6 crew members on board. And John Miller and I have been sitting here looking at each other about where these flights were going. And there's several ways to speculate about it, but you came up with one very interesting on already.
From a forensic standpoint, if you look operationally to crash these flights, it would have been just as simple to get on the Washington shuttle or the New York shuttle and crash one into the Trade Center and the other in the Pentagon. The choice of flights here, Newark to San Francisco, Boston to L.A., Dulles to L.A.
Excuse me, John, I apologize. Let me come back just because we have the New York governor here.
Sure.
Governor George Pataki, the governor of New York, I believe, is on the telephone or somewhere. Governor Pataki, do you hear me?
Yes, Peter, I hear you fine.
Well, why don't you first start off, sir, and give us your appraisal of the day so
Well,
far.
it's just a horrific scene, and everybody's pulling together. We're activating the state emergency forces, but our hearts and prayers are with the victims and the families of those victims, and we have to, at this point, just focus on trying to help as many people whose lives are at risk as possible and dealing with those who have been injured.
Do you have some sense of the magnitude of casualties?
We don't want to quantify a number, but obviously it's a horrific incident that really is just an incredible outrage against the people of New York and the people of America. But at this point, our focus is on trying to make sure that those whose lives are still at risk are as protected, and those who have been injured are treated as quickly and as well as possible.
Governor, do you believe that thousands of people have been killed?
I don't want to use a number, Peter. At this point, the goal is simply to try to help as many people as possible. We're working closely with the city, with our National Guard forces coming in to help relieve the city police and fire. Obviously, it's a situation that just cries out for people to be horrified, but what we have to do at this point is focus on helping those who are at risk, helping those who have been injured, making sure there's an orderly removal from Lower Manhattan, and that is our focus at this point.
Governor, are you in a position to go to the scene? Are you in a position to go to Lower Manhattan? Do you think you should? Would you like to? Or are you locked down?
No, I'm in the city, but the important thing is to be able to stay in contact with the White House, with City Hall, with our statewide emergency services. We've gotten offers of support from all the surrounding states with their emergency services, and the critical thing right now is to be able to coordinate to make sure that the response is the strongest and the most compassionate it can be for the people whose lives are still at risk. And we're mobilizing National Guard units from across the state. We're getting help from the surrounding states and coordinating with the city, and that's what we have to do at this point.
Governor, what have you done John, about the other so-called high-profile potential targets in New York City, like the UN and the bridges and things like this? Are they all evacuated and locked down now?
UN's evacuated. The tunnels have been closed. The George Washington Bridge is open under security for emergency services coming in and people going out. We've shut down most of the mass transit. Grand Central is open under very tight security, but people who pass through the security have limited service to the northern suburbs, and we're doing the same thing on Long Island. But the important thing now is to provide as much help as quickly and as effectively to those whose lives are at risk or those who've been injured, and we're working with the city and the federal officials to make sure that happens.
Do you believe that New York City is now under control?
New York City has been under attack, and until we get through this, we just have to continue to respond as strongly as we can.
And are you in a profile now? Are you in a position where you actually think there's a potential
fires for the last several?
We just don't know. That's why we have to not only help those who have been injured, but also take every security step we can to try to prevent further incidents. We just don't know, Peter.
Okay. Governor Pataki, thank you very much. Governor George Pataki of New York, who is in New York City, which of course is where he probably belongs at a moment like this. Downtown Manhattan is saying simply that the National Guard has been called in, the tunnels are closed, the George Washington Bridge, which goes across the Hudson River from the west side of Manhattan into New Jersey. Just remember, a large segment of many thousands of people from New Jersey work in New York, and there's tremendous commerce back and forth on a daily basis. That has all been brought to a help. It's interesting to recall, John Miller, that the attack on the trade towers in '93 was launched from New Jersey, or at least the operational headquarters of the people who attacked the Trade Center were in New Jersey.
Correct. And the building of the bomb and the original conspiracy was all carried out in towns right across the river. In fact, the conspirators later admitted that they watched from New Jersey to see if the buildings would in fact fall, and they didn't. This time they did.
They did today. And Governor Pataki trying, as politicians again must on occasions like this, trying to express the horror and the commitment that the political establishment feels to those people who've died and those people who need to be rescued. No answer to every question about whether or not something was locked down or something. He came back every time that their priority now is to try to help those people who are in deep and in some cases still desperate trouble. George Stephanopoulos, one of our senior reporters, is downtown. Hey, George, where have you been? What have you seen? What do you think?
Well, Peter, I'm going to give you kind of a pool report from several of our correspondents down here of basically what happened down here in downtown New York between 9:45 and 10:45 when the two explosions and the collapse of the World Trade Center happened. At the time, I was actually in the subway heading towards the World Trade Center right around Franklin Street, and after the first explosion, the subway station started to fill with smoke. The subway cars started to fill with smoke, and the subways actually stopped. They then diverted us around the World Trade Center to Park Place, which is one stop beyond the World Trade Center. We got to that train station at around 10:35, Peter, and it was a scene unlike I've ever seen before in my entire life. As we tried to get out of the subway station and walk up into the street, it was pitch black, midnight black, snowing soot all down through downtown Manhattan. This was about 2 blocks from the World Trade Center. You couldn't see a foot in front of your face at that time. We then worked our way back uptown. All of the firefighters and police officials and National Guard are now evacuating everyone out of lower Manhattan. They're going east towards Brooklyn and north, which is where we are now, up on Canal Street. I should add as well, Peter, we had one of our reporters was downtown and had a sight line of the World Trade Center at around 9:48, which is around the time I believe the first tower collapsed, Gloria Rivera, and she saw 2, then 3, then 4 people jump out of the top floors of the World Trade Center. She was with a firefighter who said, "They're not falling, they're jumping." Watch their arms waving, and they counted 12 people jump off the top floors.
Do you want to continue, George?
Well, right now, as I said, they are evacuating everyone else out. But just to give you another sense, Peter, all over lower Manhattan, the sidewalks, the streets are covered with about 1/4 to 1/2 inch of dust, of soot, as if it were Pompeii. Most people are pretty calm right now. They're evacuating slowly as the firefighters come in. But it really was one of the most frightening, horrific scenes I've ever seen in my life.
Thanks, George, very much. Come back anytime with a report. I just, as you were concluding there, watching these guys go up that escalator, and if it's in the World Trade Center, we assume that we know that their cameraman got out, but we don't know about anybody else because, you know, within an hour and something of the time these two attacks had occurred, these two buildings had completely disappeared, and you begin increasingly to see more dramatic footage. George Stephanopoulos made a reference to Pompeii near Naples on the west coast of Italy, which was, you know, buried by a volcano, and you get exactly that same sense of freezing stuff in soot and dirt, as might have occurred by a volcano. Jim Kellstrom, with whom we're long familiar, former official of the FBI in the New York office, is on the air, very deeply involved in the Flight TWA 800 investigation. Jim, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
What do you think?
Peter?
I'm listening, Jim. I just say, what do you think? I mean, just start and all.
Well, my first thought is with the tremendous casualties, and the death toll is just overwhelming. It's a day that 50 years from now, our children, if we're still teaching history, will be taught about when we went to war on American soil with terrorism.
Jim, if you had a chance to talk to your more active colleagues in the FBI at the moment about what they're doing at the moment, whether they're able to, I mean, it seems the hardest thing at the moment is to make an appraisal of all this. It just happened, and it's just, in some respects, it's happened and it's happening, right?
Peter, you're right. I mean, it happened. It's shocking, but in some ways it isn't shocking. I mean, we've had, you know, the hatred of America played out at the Trade Center in '93. They tried to take the Trade Center down. We've had the hatred played out in the USS Cole, the bombings of our embassies in Africa, the bombings of the barracks in Saudi Arabia. So now it's being played out big time here in the United States.
Jim, what is the principal goal of the FBI at a moment like this, when all of the emergency services are brought to bear in all of these locations? What's the FBI actually doing at the moment?
I think the first concern of the FBI right now, right this second, is there going to be something else happening in the next 5 minutes, 30 minutes, hour, 12 hours? Simultaneous with that, who did it? Where are they? What do we know? What's the intelligence base tell us? Why didn't we see this coming? Where do we go from here? What kind of articulate, defined information can we give the National Command Authority so that we can bring the necessary, massive retaliation necessary without a lot of collateral damage?
Well, Jim, thank you very much for checking in with us, and please do at any time if you have news. That photo, as Jim was talking, Jim Kellstrom, the former director of the FBI here, and a major force in the investigation of TWA 800, which blew up off the south coast of Long Island.
And the principal operator on the first World Trade Center bombing. Key investigation.
Right. But it's interesting, forgive me, no offense intended him, he doesn't have much to say either today, because in some respects there isn't much to say except the horror of it. But as we were looking at just a moment ago, listening to George Stephanopoulos talking to our reporters who witnessed the horrifying jump of some people from the top of the trade towers, you just saw a hint of the just ahead of this little piece of video here before, you saw a hint of what people were enduring at the top of the trade towers before they collapsed as a result of the intensity of the fire. And we've seen it before in other places around the world. Fire starts in a place, people often, ironically, not that it would have made any difference today, do the wrong thing, they get trapped in an open window by fire coming into their room, and finally they're...
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm David Ono, coming to you live from the Eyewitness Newsroom, and right now we have specific information that pertains specifically to the Los Angeles, Southern California area in regards to this disaster that we want to bring that information to you. In the meantime, as you can see on your screen, we have the network that continues on in this bottom corner right here, but we have some information that you need to be aware of when it comes to your own community. First of all, let's get to the airports. Right now, in addition to all of Los Angeles being on a full tactical tactical alert. We want to let you know that all 4 airports in Southern California, LAX, Ontario, Burbank, John Wayne, they have all been shut down. We're also getting information that LAX is being evacuated as a precautionary measure right now. So they are evacuating LAX airport. Let's get you up to date on where some domestic flights are right now. From what we understand, there are still 50 domestic flights up in the air, 22 international flights in the air. Now, as for domestic flights, we understand that they are all being rerouted to Ontario International Airport. That's in the Inland Empire. If you are still waiting for a loved one to come in who is up in the air and it's a domestic flight, you can look for that person to be flying into Ontario International Airport in the Inland Empire. If that person is...
But you should look at the south lawn of the White
Fires for the last several
on an international flight, look for that flight to be diverted to either Canada or Mexico. So that's Canada or Mexico. And as you've been listening to network news, they have confirmed that 4 major airlines have crashed. Airliners have crashed. 3 of those 4 were heading to LAX. Now, among those 3, 2 are American airline flights, 1 a United Airlines flight. Let me quickly go through each one of these flights for you. First of all, American Airlines Flight 11. It was a Boeing 767 en route from Boston to Los Angeles. It crashed into the World Trade Center. The plane was carrying 81 passengers, 9 flight attendants, and 2 pilots. Also, there was American Airlines Flight 77. It was a Boeing 757 en route from Dulles Airport in Washington, or near Washington, to Los Angeles International Airport. That crashed into the World Trade Center, and that plane was carrying 58 passengers, 4 flight attendants, and 2 pilots. There's also the United Airlines Flight 175, a Boeing 767. That flight was bound from Boston to Los Angeles. It was carrying 56 passengers, 2 pilots, 7 flight attendants. The airline would not say where that plane crashed. Now, if you think you have a loved one that may be on that flight, we have 2 very important hotline numbers for you to call. If you think your loved one was on an American Airlines flight, here's the hotline. It is 800-245-0999. 800-245-0999. That's American Airlines hotline. The United Airlines hotline is 800-932-8555. Once again, United Airlines hotline, 800-932-8555. And as I said, there's still 50 domestic flights in the air, 22 international flights in the air, and they're said to be safe. They're just trying to get to their destination. That's just in case you are waiting for someone who is up in the air right now. Let's get you caught up in some of the other information that in regards to this disaster that's going on. Speaking of airports, there are a number of traffic problems in and around LAX due to security measures. First of all, the Century Boulevard off-ramps from the eastbound and westbound Glen Anderson 105 freeway have been shut down. These are all for precautionary measures for security. The off-ramps leading to LAX from the northbound and southbound San Diego 405 freeway have all been shut down. So there are going to be some serious traffic problems in and around the Los Angeles International Airport on the 105 freeway and the 405 freeway. If you intend on taking one of those off-ramps, it's not going to be available for you. So try to keep that in mind as you travel throughout Southern California. Let's talk about theme parks right now. All 4 major theme parks have been shut down as a precautionary measure, and that is Disneyland, Knott's Berry Farm, Universal Studios, Magic Mountain. All 4 of these parks have been shut down. Also, as a precautionary measure, the border between the U.S. and Mexico down near Tijuana and San Diego has also been closed, so no traffic through the border as well. For sports fans, you may not have heard yet, but all major league games, including the Angels game today in Anaheim, and the Dodgers game tonight in San Diego have been canceled, so there will be no baseball tonight. And let me read you this real quickly. Los Angeles Police Chief Bernard Parks has told reporters that department personnel from the Anti-Terrorist Division are being deployed to look at local places that could be potential targets of terrorists. He did not elaborate, but what we assume is that they're being as safe as possible and trying to secure as many buildings that could potentially be of a target for terrorists, and they're trying to make sure that all those buildings are safe. and the traffic through them is safe as well. Okay, so that's the latest information when it comes to news affecting the Southern California area. We're going to stay on top of the situation. Right now, we're going to throw it back to Network News and Peter Jennings.
Were apparently, or you could speculate, chosen to give the terrorists the very biggest bang for their effort.
And it's a very interesting point you make, because again, our assumptions tend to go when we see huge explosions like this. None of us understanding visually the power of explosives, that there were explosives on board, and so you're quite right, it may indeed have been the aircraft explosion.
I mean, John Nance could help us with this, but when you hear the amount of fuel, very flammable aeronautical fuel that's loaded onto a plane for a 3,000-mile trip or something, that's going to give you quite an explosion. Flight 800, which was an international flight, to those who saw it, was an incredible explosion.
John, if you'd sit at your station for a second, I'm just going to go and try to check one piece of information, and in that period of time, we're going to try to give you a little better sense of the disaster at the trade towers today. Here's something we've compiled, and we compile it as we go along.
I was standing next to One World Trade Center, and then all of a sudden I heard rumbling, and we all started running away from it. The glass like blew out and threw me onto the sidewalk, and I couldn't see for like 20 seconds. And then I started seeing vaguely the street, and I just started walking, and my eyesight came back.
I see you're bloody. You have dust all over you.
Yeah, it was bad. It was like a dust storm or something. Like I couldn't see anything.
How badly are you hurt?
I have no idea.
As soon as she got hit, I was thrown to a window. So I was very lucky to get out. There's a lot of people that didn't get out. There's a lot of people coming down the stairs, burnt up. It's bad.
We just come out of Tower 1. We were walking towards Broadway. They're saying, move along, move along, move along. I looked up as soon as we got across the street. I looked up, I saw the tower start to buckle. I just turned and ran, ducked down, put a jacket over my head. 3 or 4 of us huddled together, and it was just black everywhere.
Were you covered? Were you hit with debris?
No. But I mean, I was ducked behind a subway cover, so I put with the jacket over. The 3 of us, all of us huddled together. There was, dust and whatnot everywhere, but it was.
Building has just come down. The second everyone's being asked to get down, come down.
Can't even look at it, because all I can see are people. I don't see a building, I see people. People hurt. Children without mothers and fathers tonight.
If you're just joining us, you probably already know the World Trade Center towers, the Twin Towers, the New York landmarks have collapsed and are gone. The Pentagon has been hit by an airplane, a series of hijackings apparently today at the root of this. What we know is hundreds, if not thousands, are injured, no count on the deceased yet, and that the investigation, a massive investigation, is just beginning to unfold.
But John, I stepped aside there, among other things, the moment to try to get some sort of sense from people who talk to, because as soon as this happens, people begin to think about a response. We don't expect a response to come in the immediate future by any means, but I was just talking to Charlie Gibson from Good Morning America, and he'd been thinking about the same thing, that the response to this from the United States is going to have to be massive. They have to accomplish something in some way, because so much of the response to terrorism before by a large nation such as this, which is not impotent but very limited in its capacity to operate at this kind of level. You were mentioning earlier the attacks against Osama bin Laden's training camps in Afghanistan. In retrospect, they spent, as you pointed out, more than $1 million per cruise missile. I forgot how many they sent. No, they didn't get anything. They didn't get anything. They didn't do anything. So it's an enormous challenge for a powerful nation to respond in an effective way. And the Pentagon is still burning, and today the World Trade Center towers have gone. Diane Sawyer is down in Times Square at the moment, and among other things, I think has been trying to get some grasp of the number of casualties involved. It must be very difficult, Diane.
It's impossible, Peter, no matter how many people you call. And of course, no matter what the facts we get now, one can only imagine what the facts will be later. I want to give you a sense of what it's like here in Times Square right now. Because if you look outside, we have hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of people standing outside, just stopping still, a kind of respectful witness, looking up at the screens where we're broadcasting the pictures. They can't hear the sound. They are simply looking at the wordless horror and standing to show, in a way, respect. And I want to show you something else, because people have been sent home from Times Square, and across the way, the construction workers who were building the Toys R Us building next door to us just hung their signs outside. God bless America, and pray for families and victims. And we can only, of course, add to that as crisply as we try to report what's happening here today, we join them. And this is not just another story, even for reporters who've been trained to do this for so long. A few things to add since this morning. We were on the air, of course, live when suddenly we get word of that first explosion at the World Trade Center, the first building. And initially, of course, we didn't know if it was an accident. We didn't know what had happened. And then we were on the air live when the second plane came in and the second plane hit. And I want to show you now, this is what we were seeing live on the air. And as you've expressed before, Peter, the combination of disbelief and horror and simple prayer for somebody to save the people who were inside that building is all anybody can do, as an entire network is broadcasting live something so unimaginable. I have talked, as you all have, and as George Stephanopoulos reported, to the people who were inside as these scenes were taking place. We now see the first collapse, which of course took place about 10 a.m. Eastern Time, and then it would be about 28 minutes later that we would see the second collapse of the second building. And while we're watching the scene, each person desperate to stop this tape and go and do something. All we can do is relive the horror each time we see it. I have talked to people who are inside the building, one of them Fran Martin, who is the aunt of someone who works here at ABC, and she was saying that the first experience inside the building was that earthquake-like feeling a number of people have mentioned, and then something else in an eerie, silent, kind of mournful foliage. You saw paper just wafting out in all directions, and it was so mysterious to everyone. They couldn't imagine what had happened. The paper was scattering, and we've now read some 3 miles out, way across the river, the paper from those floors. As they came down the stairs, we're told that people were remarkably calm, were remarkably respectful of each other as they were making their way down, even though a number of them had lived through that bombing 8 years ago. A number of them remembered what it was when the bomb went off in the basement of the World Trade Center. And of course, as we now know, if the cyanide gas had not vaporized in those bombs, that it would have been a cataclysm even beyond what was experienced then, so they could all relive it as they were making their way down. Now we're watching the scenes as the building is collapsing and people are running from it. People are covered with this kind of spectral suit from the building's collapse itself. I want to point out again, and you've talked about it too, Peter, all the firefighters were immediately called on duty. All the firefighters immediately raced in from wherever they were to help out, all the emergency medical service personnel. This was a great display of human concern and human consideration. And you've mentioned before, we have this report that 200 firefighters are now missing, and yet they have done everything they can. Every hospital is open, every hand is on deck, every doctor is standing by in the city of New York with all this courage and struggle and still heartbreak out there in the streets right now. So that's it from Times Square, Peter.
Thank you very much, Diane. I remember working with Diane on the Millennium broadcast on New Year's Eve 2000. Diane had such a joyful time in Times Square. It is Whatever you think of New York in general, it is a place where people from around the world gather to express themselves, and so we'll go back there on occasion to get some, so you can really get some sense of the world in Times Square. And President Bush has been on the phone today to a variety of world leaders, clearly discussing this with them at the highest possible level. And perhaps they're all as confused as the rest of us are as to what has happened, who perpetrated these acts of terrorism in the United States, and what is to be done in response. Though this is perhaps, we're only 4 hours since this actually happened, and perhaps it is not quite the time to begin to think about the precision of a response, but a response will be required of some magnitude that will mean something from the United States if one is ever able to pin down exactly who the perpetrators were. We told you that the president was in Florida this morning, where he'd intended to talk about education today and was coming back to Washington. He's made it as far as Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, where he landed about an hour and a bit ago, just before
fires for the last several
noon Eastern time, where he's made a statement to the cameras, which we haven't got our hands on yet. But the president said that freedom had been attacked, but freedom will be defended. And the president is in touch with his national security team. Ann Compton, ABC's Ann Compton, who covers the White House for us for many years from us, tells us that jet fighters accompanied Air Force One, and that as best we can tell, the Air Force One was flying at a particularly high altitude. There are no planes taking off or landing or taking off in the United States at the moment, with the exception of Air Force One, though the Federal Aviation Administration says at the moment that 50 known aircraft, this is actually a few minutes old, 50 known aircraft are all in the sky within approximately 50 miles of their destination. So you can feel across the country that aircraft that were in flight are beginning to settle down. They were ordered to settle down by the FAA and to land at the nearest possible airport. And so that has begun to work out. Now in Washington, I think Claire Shipman at the White House or near it has some further information about the president. Yes, Claire.
Well, that's right, Peter. Essentially, what we've learned is what he told the pool cameras a few minutes ago, and we're hopefully going to see in just a few minutes, but he said that he and this government have taken steps to ensure the functioning of the United States government, that the U.S. military is on high alert at home and abroad. He said he has taken all appropriate security measures to protect Americans. He says freedom itself has been attacked and freedom will be protected. And finally, he also said he will hunt down and punish those responsible for this. Again, we're hoping to see him in person, but as you mentioned, it looks as though this may be the secure place that they've decided on for the president, at least temporarily, Barksdale Air Force Base in Shreveport, Louisiana.
I'd be really curious, Claire, and I realize how difficult it is at the moment, whether or not there's not pressure, political pressure in Washington from the members of the president's own staff and cabinet for him to show up soon in front of the country and assure them beyond his statement that freedom has been attacked and freedom will be defended, of course, because it wasn't defended this morning.
Well, I think
whether or not the president to be seen in command in a more vigorous way.
I think you're absolutely right, and I'm sure it's a delicate balance right now between the Secret Service and those who are trying to protect the president, keeping him out of sight in someplace secure, and his political advisors who would clearly like to see him make a statement. You saw how quickly he did it this morning, as brief as it was, and certainly a piece of tape that we're going to see in a few minutes, we hope, is not what they would like to see the president doing right now. They would like to see him making something of a more formal statement. But again, it could be a number of hours before the president is back in Washington and prepared to talk to us from that forum.
Okay, thanks very much, Claire. We'll come back to you anytime you want. And again, none of us should be surprised at what's happening. First of all, Secret Service is a huge, powerful, authoritative organization which takes the president's safety and other members of the senior political leadership with deep and profound seriousness, but they have enormous power. And so if you're talking between a senior political official and the president's Secret Service official of equal stature at the moment, who's going to win that argument at the moment? And this is particularly true in a situation which continues to unfold, because while the devastation, perhaps the greatest devastation has occurred in New York City this morning, it's also occurred outside Washington at the Pentagon, and the tension is there all across the country, because not only were the United Nations and various government buildings evacuated here in New York City, but the Sears Tower in Chicago, the tallest skyscrapers in Boston and Cleveland and Minneapolis, and the Space Needle in Seattle. So the psychological effect on people in the country is huge. It may indeed be settling down after several hours, but the president and his response to this is also part of the psychological package, because the country looks to the president on occasions like this to be reassuring to the nation. Some presidents do it well, and some presidents don't. But ABC's Ann Compton is with the president at the moment, and we have her on the telephone. Annie.
Peter, it has been a frightening couple of hours for President Bush. We took off in Air Force One from Florida, where he first got word of this, and we literally, Peter, have been flying at well over 40,000 feet west. The White House unable to tell us where we were headed or how long it would take. There were jet fighters off the wing just out of our sight until we landed. And the president has spent the time on board the aircraft talking not only to world leaders but to the vice president, to his cabinet. He even checked in with Mrs. Bush, trying to get more information. We were high enough so that the Air Force was actually able to get some television signal. We don't know much about what's gone on the ground, but he has been able to see some of it on a very fuzzy television picture. We landed here at Barksdale Air Force Base. This is near Shreveport, Louisiana, at about 11:45 Eastern Time. We were not allowed to use cell phones or give you any indication of where we were until local people noticed the plane on the ground. The president has just made a statement, Peter, a very emotional one, saying that freedom has been attacked, but freedom will be defended, saying that America's military is on its highest state of alert. World leaders have been assured that the U.S. will do whatever it takes to protect America and Americans. Frankly, Peter, I thought the president not only looked grim, very solemn, but his eyes looked somewhat red.
Annie, let me ask you a couple of questions, if I may. First of all, the president was on a education trip, ostensibly in Florida today. How much of the national security team was with him?
This is actually a skeleton team with him on a short, it was a trip that lasted only about 24 hours. He was just making his last appearance before returning to Washington. And Karl Rove, one of his senior counselors, is with him, and his press secretary, Ari Fleischer, but none of the national security apparatus, such as Condoleezza Rice, who would ordinarily travel with the president on a more substantive trip. But on Air Force One, of course, he has the full resources of communications, but he does not have the full team with him.
Well, let's talk about this for a second, because when the president took off from Florida and went immediately to 40,000 feet, and I believe actually got a fighter escort for part of the way, it reminds one a little bit of what it was like in the Cold War, because the Cold War, there was always a provision that the senior members of the government, president included, could in fact run the country from a command center in the sky. Is that basically what's happening this morning?
Absolutely. In fact, the U.S. used to have 5 aircraft, now Air Force One. Let me know if we're being taken out of here. We may be scrambled out of here.
Okay.
Are we leaving? Okay, Peter, we are leaving. And
where are you going, Annie?
Peter, I have no idea. They have not told us. They have kept us. We don't even know whether we'll be able to see the president or travel with him, but we are told that he's been traveling. He will continue. They are still quite worried about his own security.
Off you go, and Ann, thanks very much for a very, very full report on the state of, and perhaps even a little bit of the mental condition of the president at the moment. And we cannot state it often enough. The country looks to him, and so he may have stopped at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, which is just where Arkansas and Texas and Louisiana all come together at an Air Force base out of the way, and he may be safe at 40,000 feet in Air Force One, but before long the country is going to expect him to be back in Washington to send, if not only a message, not just a message to those of us in the nation who look to the president for some sense of political national stability, but also to the other parts of the world where these enemies of the United States, with whom we've talked quite a lot about today, at the moment must surely think they have the United States on the run to some extent. And while the Taliban, the political leadership, political, military, religious leadership in Afghanistan said this morning that they condemned this and had nothing to do with it, and it could not have been Osama bin Laden because he wasn't sophisticated enough to do it. It had to be a country or a government, certainly. And while the chairman of the Palestinian Authority, Yasser Arafat, came out and put as much distance as they could between them and the Palestinian people, this acted in the Palestinian people, the president needs to be on station to talk it. As does the mayor of New York, and Mayor Giuliani is with us at the moment. Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
I can, Peter.
Mr. Mayor, I saw you several times on the street today, and it looked like you were deeply sharing the horror that all of us feel, but I'd really appreciate, aside from, on top of your sentiments about all this, give us some sense of what's going on.
What is going on now is a massive rescue effort. We have thousands of police officers and firefighters in Lower Manhattan trying to rescue as many people as we possibly can. There are still a lot of people there that are injured, hurt, dazed, and we're trying to get them out, and we're mobilizing all of our fire, police, and emergency resources to do that. The governor has alerted the National Guard, and they're being deployed to come and relieve us early to later this afternoon. And the urban search and rescue teams are coming here from around the country to also assist us. But until then, which means until probably 2, 3, 4 o'clock this afternoon, our police department, our fire department, and our emergency people are being stretched to the limit. And I'm sure we've also lost a significant number of them.
Now, you're reluctant, I assume, to put any other name attached to the casualties except significant. Do you believe it's hundreds or thousands?
I really don't. I really don't want to say right now, Peter. I think it's going to be a horrible number. I saw people jumping out of the World Trade Center. I saw some of the firefighters who I know going into the building. And we were in a building in which we were trapped for about 10, 15 minutes.
Are you talking about did you go immediately to the Office of Emergency Management?
No, I went down to the scene, and we set up headquarters at 75 Barclay Street, which was right there with the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, the head of emergency management. And we were operating out of there when we were told that the World Trade Center was going to collapse. And it did collapse before we could actually get out of the building. So we were trapped in the building for 10, 15 minutes and finally found an exit and got out, walked north, and took a lot of people with us.
My question is, the Office of Emergency Management headquarters, into which you put enormous effort for coordination in a disaster like this, has it been damaged? Is it still operating? It's gone?
It's been damaged. I don't know how badly. And right now, that whole area of Manhattan, including the police department, which is another area we would operate from, City Hall, is another area we would operate from, have been closed off. So we've moved to a secure location in Midtown Manhattan where we're operating city government.
Is it fair to say, do you think, that all of your drills for dealing with terrorism and disaster are going according to plan, or has this been of such of magnitude that we've just all been caught totally off balance?
Oh, there's no question we were all caught totally off balance. No one could possibly expect large airplanes to crash into the World Trade Center the way this happened. I think, having said that, as I watched what the police officers and the firefighters were doing, I think they're going to save the maximum number of lives you could possibly save in a situation like this. I mean, the emergency efforts that they've been going through over the last 2.5 hours are nothing short of inspiring.
And when the National Guard comes in to say, did you say to take over or offer some relief, what can the National Guard do that you cannot do at a city level?
Oh, at this point, what they can do is relieve men who are going to be exhausted physically and emotionally.
Now, just if you would, because I know how busy you are, just give us some sense of what you thought at the time about all this.
I thought that I would never live to see anything like this. I didn't think anything like this was possible. When I first arrived there, I rushed down there from Midtown Manhattan, and I saw the first building that had been crashed open. And when you look at it, it takes you a minute to really comprehend that this is actually happening. And to see people jumping from the top of the World Trade Center. I mean, I don't think I've ever had a nightmare that's worse than this.
Mr. Mayor, one last question. You said you never believed you'd live to see anything like this, and yet in the past you've been one of the leaders in preparing for just this kind of thing to happen.
Yeah, but you keep you prepare for the worst, but you don't believe that it'll happen, and this is the worst. And I can only say that I thank God for the police department and the fire department that we have, because this would be much, much worse. And I'm also very proud of the people of the city. We evacuated Lower Manhattan with literally thousands of people, walked along with them, and they conducted themselves really, really, really well.
Well, I appreciate your time, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for communicating all this.
The Mayor of New York, Rudolph Giuliani, in his last term, immensely popular with some, not popular with others, which is not relevant at the moment, but because he puts his finger on something about New York. Whatever you think of New York, no matter where you live in the country, this is a city which behaves pretty well in crisis. There's a public spirit here in this city. You see it in blackouts, you see it in snowstorms. This is not the city of its it's not the city that we often criticize from other perspectives around the country in times of crisis. So when the mayor says he's proud of the people of New York as well as the fire department and the police, one should not be surprised. But it is fascinating and terrifying to hear what he says. You prepare for the worst and you never believe it'll happen. And his emergency management headquarters right down there near the trade centers, which are no longer possible to operate, this is what they put into place so that in the worst of circumstances, government would have a place
fires for the last several
to operate, and they can't operate from there. They've had to move uptown because the police department and City Hall are not operable, if you will, under the circumstances. And he, the mayor, you heard it yourselves, said he never believed he would live to see anything like this. True of many people. George Stephanopoulos in downtown Manhattan with an eyewitness.
Yes, Peter, I'm here with Neil Stevens, who was in his apartment downtown early this morning getting ready for work as he heard the explosion. Neil, why don't you tell us what you saw?
Okay, I was in my apartment. I was getting ready for work. I heard a large explosion, and I thought at first it was thunder because there was thunder last night. And I looked outside, and I saw some construction workers who were working on the roof of the building next to mine. They were looking downtown. They were all looking downtown, and I thought, I wonder what they're looking at. So I looked over, and I could see the World Trade Center towers from my window. And I looked over, and I could see the tower, and there was a huge gash in the side of it. It's about 10 stories high, almost the full width of the building. And there was black smoke just billowing out of it, and flames, large flames. And I thought, my God, I don't know what happened, but huge explosion. And that was pretty much it. And made some personal telephone calls, kept getting ready for work, and I was in the shower and I heard the second explosion, and that's pretty much what I saw.
Thank you very much. Sure. Peter, we also have some news on the evacuations. We've spoken with 2 security guards in the second tower who did say the evacuation of the second tower had begun. And we've also spoken with people who were on the 82nd and the 86th floor. So many people were evacuated. Of course, we don't have any sorts of numbers. One final note, Peter, I was picking up on what Mayor Giuliani was saying about the work of the firemen and the policemen. I would also add a word for the transit authority. The subways were terrifying earlier this morning, but all of the employees of the transit authority did a terrific job of evacuating the subways, even though they were filled with smoke, keeping people calm and keeping them actually in the station so that they wouldn't go out into the street as the soot was falling. One other word, Peter. Right now, the people who are working downtown are handing out these respirators because there is some concern of the buildings that there is a great deal of asbestos in the building. So they're asking everyone downtown who is walking downtown, if they're down there, to put on these respirators, and they're handing them out on the corners.
Thank you very much, George Stephanopoulos, who continue to work this story from as close as you can get to the disaster area. But imagine a city that's sort of frozen in place. You saw a picture just a moment ago of the George Washington Bridge, which is closed except under very serious security circumstances. You can get across the. That means that's New Jersey on the other side, cut off from the island of Manhattan. All the tunnels are closed. The railroads are not operating, therefore, between New York and New Jersey. This island of Manhattan is pretty much frozen in place at the moment, while people wait and are reluctant to try to appraise the number of casualties that have been that have occurred in the World Trade Centers and their related area. But bear in mind that about 50,000, what did I say, Nancy? 50,000 people work in the trade towers. 80,000 people perhaps work in the adjoining areas. We've seen them in flight, and we have seen not one but 2 towers absolutely collapse upon themselves. And elsewhere in the country, we're still uncertain. There's still an unknown number of aircraft who've been ordered to land that haven't managed to get down to the ground. We're not absolutely certain that there are any aircraft on missions, if you will, which are unaccounted for, despite the fact there was a report some time ago that the aircraft which crashed outside Pittsburgh may have been on its way to Camp David. I emphasize that that's reporting of which we're absolutely not very sure at all. But ABC's Barry Serafin is at the Capitol at the moment, and we've been told for some time that the Senate leadership there was going to be sent to a secure location. Do you have a current status report, Barry?
Well, Peter, we're not sure exactly what we're seeing here, but a few minutes ago, about 10 minutes ago, a military helicopter landed here behind me on the west lawn of the White House. And then a large group of people were seen to walk out to it, get on board, and fly right above us, over the mall in the direction of the Pentagon, perhaps. My guess, and it's only a guess at this point, is that these were members of the Senate leadership and the House leadership, and perhaps members of the intelligence committees on their way to a briefing to try to figure out what in the world is going on today.
Were you able to walk up around the hill?
No, Peter, we, like everybody else, have been kind of pushed off of the hill. They've got a cordon for blocks now around the Capitol. In effect, they've sanitized that area. So we're about 4 blocks from the foot of the hill here.
And do you have any sense was there a sense of anticipation there? People sort of waiting for something to happen at the Capitol?
Well, there is. Every time any kind of aircraft shows itself, and there haven't been many, there have been a few government helicopters moving around, all eyes turn to the sky, as you might imagine.
Precisely, Barry. Thanks very much. Barry Serafin, who's up at the Capitol. One of the things that is absolutely certain at the moment, which is to say that the chain of command in the country is very much in place. So you can just imagine yourself in some other country at the moment trying to anticipate, maybe even exhilarating at what's happening in the United States at the moment, and having some belief that you've disrupted everything. President's at 40,000 feet, just about to take off from Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. We don't know where he's going, but I have to assume he's going to go to Washington. Cannot have the president being seen to be running around the country. By the way, the baseball games have all been postponed today. The entire Major League Baseball schedule has been postponed for today, as much as a mark of mourning and sadness for what happened in a variety of locations today. U.S. Earlier on evacuated embassies around the world. They're all quite familiar with that because on any number of occasions in the course of a year, you hear us say on the news that the State Department of the Pentagon has ordered a worldwide alert because something is going to happen or potentially going to happen to some kind of terrorist attack that's going to occur in some part of the world. The most recent terrorist alert, ironically, was in Asia over last weekend. In Japan and in South Korea, American embassies were put on alert because somebody somewhere in the in the intelligence establishment believed there was some potential for an attack. And it's something government has to do. It's something government has to do. Government has no choice, it argues. A lot of times you'll hear people saying, well, they've put up a state of alert again and nothing happened, and so they just do it all the time. It's very hard on Americans traveling overseas to be somewhere where there's a state of alert. But as John McWethy, who covers the military establishment for us, points out, is something government is obliged to do, lest something ever happen and there had not been an alert. John, are you there? John McKenzie? John McWethy?
John McWethy's here.
Yeah, John, I'm sorry, I was obviously talking about not John McKenzie. This is I guess what one notices more than anything else today. This was a place where there was no terrorism alert. Nobody, I gather, that you've talked today seemed to know anything.
One of the things that they have been studying so scrupulously over the last several months is how Osama bin Laden and other terrorist groups operate, Peter. They felt that they had some ability to monitor critical communications from these groups. I think it's going to be proved that the groups have learned some very important and deadly lessons from past terrorist events and the way the U.S. has been able to monitor them. It seems quite clear in this instance that they bypassed the normal methods of communicating and were able to organize this very complex operation in a way that basically escaped American detection.
But John, I'm sorry, but I think a lot of Americans will hear you talking and be reminded that how often the government tells us how much more sophisticated it is and how much better able they are to monitor all this.
They are able to better monitor it, Peter, but every time, and you and I know this because we have had conversations with high-ranking government officials about how much detail we put on the air. Every time the news media puts on these details, it helps the terrorists to understand the way that our government goes about monitoring their communications. Oftentimes, those communications intercepts are very sophisticated, but the terrorists are clearly adjusting.
John, I wonder, by the way, on a slightly different subject, in terms of today's disaster, whether you picked up reports of U.S. aircraft carriers being sent to New York Harbor to help in some way, maybe even to be floating platforms?
I have not picked that up, Peter, but basically I'm standing on a highway at this point, so I'm not exactly plugged in.
I appreciate that, John, and we benefit tremendously from your knowledge, so thanks very much. Come back at us when you think of something else you'd like to contribute. We talk about, the United States and Canada cooperated today in closing down the airports. A reminder to us that all Canadian airports, or most Canadian airports, at least major Canadian airports, are very close to the U.S. border. We learned just a short while ago that Israel today, the United States and Israeli relationships so very close, closed all of its airspace to foreign aircraft today and evacuated many of its embassies and missions overseas. In terms of the war against terrorism, the United States and Israel are seen by the terrorists and the potential terrorists and the people who would do one harm as partners in this. And so it's perfectly natural for the Israelis to be doubly and trebly on a state of alert today. We've now managed to get the tape of President Bush speaking at Barksdale Air Force in Louisiana on his way from Florida to, as you heard Ann Compton say, somewhere. We assume Washington. And here's what the president had to say when he was in Louisiana.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested. But make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
Well, the president could not have spoken more accurately in that final remark there. A great nation is being tested. And the president reassures the nation and anybody else in the world who will hear this that the nation will pass the test. And there is no doubt about that, I think. In the United States of America, as horrible as these incidents are and as tragic as Oklahoma City was, the great strength of the nation, is always there. I recognize that's one man's opinion and doesn't account for the individual shock of individual families or intelligence or military establishments, which have all suffered a grievous blow today in one way or the other. But it does say, I think, what people in most parts of the world believe, that as.
Good morning, I'm David Ono, coming to you live from the Eyewitness Newsroom in Glendale. And what we want to do right now is keep you up to date and posted on the latest developments in regards to this disaster as it affects Los Angeles and Southern California. And there have been a host of changes that we want to quickly run down for you right now. First of all, the LAPD is on full tactical alert. As we reported earlier, all local airports, in fact, all airports across the country have been shut down right now, and that includes LAX, Ontario, Burbank, John Wayne, and Long Beach. We're going to, in just a second, go over some of those planes, flights that have been affected, the 4 that have been confirmed to have gone down. I'll have that information for you shortly, as well as hotline numbers for you. But also, ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach have been closed. Now, earlier reported the U.S. and Mexico border was shut down. They have now reopened it. However, they warn us that travel through the border is extremely slow right now. Also, if you have children in school, the LAUSD school they are on schedule. However, there is one exception, and that exception has to do with La Cañada. La Cañada High School has been closed because of its close proximity to JPL, and apparently that is a security risk. So La Cañada High School has been closed. All other LAUSD schools are open and in
The American. There was nice weather outside, so I didn't know what
business right now. MTA buses and trains are on schedule. That's as of now. But as of 1 o'clock today, the MTA Red Line will close. That's 1 o'clock today. The Red Line will close. What they estimate, they'll close it for about an hour while they check the tracks and check the whole Red Line to make sure it is safe for all travelers. That's going to happen at 1 o'clock today. Also, we want to let you know that Greyhound bus lines have closed most of their ports. So if you're traveling via Greyhound, you most likely are not going to get anywhere today. We might as well get into the airlines right now that have gone down. We have confirmation that 2 American airliners and 2 United airliners have crashed in regards to this. 3 of those 4 were heading to LAX. Let's give you the first one. American Flight 11. It was heading from Boston to LAX. It crashed into the World Trade Center. It was a Boeing 767. 81 passengers and 11 crew members were on board. Another American airline flight, it's Flight 77 from Washington, D.C. to LAX. It crashed into the World Trade Center as well. It was a Boeing 757 with 58 passengers on board, 6 crew members. United flights. United Flight 175, Boston to LAX. It crashed. Right now, the location has not been revealed or confirmed to us, but we do know it was a Boeing 767 with 56 passengers on board, 9 crew members. And there is also United Flight 93. It was coming from Newark to San Francisco, and it crashed near Pittsburgh. It was a Boeing 757, 38 passengers and 7 crewmen. Now, we have 2 hotlines for you in case you think you have a loved one on one of these 4 flights. First of all, the American hotline is 800-245-0999. That's 800-245-0999. United's hotline is 800-932-8555. That's 800-932-8555 for United. Now, if you are only calling for information in regards to flights, do not call these hotlines. These are reserved for people who think they might have family members. Please do not tie these lines up. In regards to LAX, it is being evacuated right now. LAX is being evacuated as a precautionary measure. Also, the area around LAX is being secured, and that means if you are traveling on the 405 and the 105 right now, you're going to run into problems when it comes to the exits in and around LAX. So go over those right now. The Century Boulevard off-ramps for the eastbound and the westbound 105, that's a Glenn Anderson, the eastbound, westbound 105 freeway, they have been shut down. Also, the off-ramps leading to LAX from the northbound and the southbound San Diego, that's the 405. That's the off-ramps leading to LAX, northbound, southbound San Diego, have also been closed. Aviation Boulevard and Century Boulevard have been closed towards LAX, and Sepulveda Boulevard between Imperial Highway and Manchester Avenue have also been affected. Other things affected because of this tragedy, major movie studios, including Sony Pictures and 20th Century Fox, they are closed, including tours, production of television, and motion pictures. So all major studios, movie studios, have been closed. And also, the second annual Latin Grammy Awards a controversial subject in itself that was just relocated to Los Angeles. That has been postponed. It was supposed to happen tonight at Staples Center. They have postponed it indefinitely. We'll keep you posted on that. If you're planning to drop by the Beverly Center and do some shopping, you're not going to do it today. Beverly Center has been shut down. Local theme parks have been shut down. That means Disneyland, California Adventure, Knott's Berry Farm, Six Flags, and Magic Mountain. Also, we do have a little bit of good news for you, and that is, we told you earlier that there were a number of flights still up in the air and that they are trying to get them down. Now, all planes have been accounted for. The FAA has confirmed this, that all planes have been accounted for, so that is some good news. Okay, and let me also let you know about some financial information. Word from Jim Newman at the ABC Business Desk is the U.S. dollar is plunging due to this disaster. That's the U.S. dollar on the foreign market is plunging. Oil prices are soaring right now. Police Chief Bernard Parks, he talked to the media just a little while ago, and he said that his anti-terrorist division, they're being deployed to look at local places that could be potential targets of terrorism. They're making sure that they cover all their bases, making sure everything is safe for you. And I also want to clarify that I said LAUSD schools are on schedule, which is true. I also mentioned La Cañada School is canceled. High school has been canceled. That is not in the LAUSD school district, La Cañada, but we want to reiterate that La Cañada High School has been shut down because of its close proximity to JPL. Is that correct? Hang on. We don't know. Okay. And also I'm being told that the Latin Grammys are at the Forum, not at Staples. I think I've gone over, let me check my notes real quickly. If you are looking for a loved one who is flying in on any kind of a domestic flight, domestic flights that are coming into this area were rerouted to Ontario International Airport. That's in the Inland Empire. Ontario International Airport. All domestic flights were rerouted to that airport. If you have a loved one on a flight that's coming in, more than likely that person is there. If he or she was on an international flight, we have to tell you that all international flights were diverted to Canada. So that's the information when it comes to your flights. We're going to keep monitoring the situation when it comes to specific information about the Los Angeles, Southern California area. We're going to bring it to you just as soon as we can. In the meantime, we're going to throw it back to the network and keep it right here on ABC 7.
I mean, the unspeakable, the collapsing of the Twin Towers, one after another, that while there was a high pitch to a lot of the voices and a little screaming and yelling, the rapidity with which calm was restored on the radio, and they went back to sending orders and continuing operations and acting in a logical manner. You really do revert to your training as a second nature.
As you look at this and you listen to John Miller, and I thank you, John, for that. No one is better plugged into the police and firefighting apparatus in New York City than John Miller. He not only been a reporter for most of his adult life, but he worked for the police department in New York for a while before he had the good sense to come back to journalism, and he is totally plugged in. But even and when he talks about soft numbers here, it's because as you look at this disaster scene, and that's a live picture. That is a live picture 9, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 4.5 hours after this actually occurred, and you're looking at the smoke and the dust still emerging from the edges of these canyons in lower Manhattan, and the magnitude of trying to deal with these people, extends to moving them across the Hudson River in ferry boats, the ubiquitous ferry boat in New York harbors, not as necessary as they were in the days of greater ship travel, to the New Jersey side. And the Canadian television network, our partner, one of our partner television networks in Canada, is now reporting that American burn victims from here, I'm not sure whether it's the Pentagon or here, but I suspect it's from here, are being transported as far away as Canada to Canadian hospitals there. And there you get some sense of how difficult it is to get a real grasp of how enormous this is, other than to say, as the mayor of New York and the governor of New York State both said to us a short while ago, I just don't want to touch the casualty figures as of now. Pierre Thomas, who's been with us for much of the morning, also reports from the FBI. And we may never know much more about one of the aircraft than this, that at least one of the planes this morning, we haven't got no more details on that, was able to communicate that it had been hijacked. In some cockpits, In some of the aircraft now being used in commercial service, there's a button you can hit that sends a code to your headquarters that says you've been hijacked, so you don't have to try to tell the hijacker that you're actually talking to headquarters. But that's as much as we know about one of the several aircraft today which were involved in attacks on the United States. Now, Diane Sawyer at Times Square has been trying, I know as best she can, to get some handle on casualties vis-a-vis the people who are pouring into hospitals. Diane?
Right, Peter, here's all I know, and it's kind of postscript to what John Miller was saying earlier. With Beekman Hospital, the closest hospital, as he said, has been relatively out of commission. But St. Vincent's Hospital, which is one of those in the next perimeter, 25 major hospitals in New York, this is one of the next closest, told us just minutes ago they had 184 hospitalized, 2 dead. Now, again, we know that these figures are going to be changing almost minute by minute, so this is very early. But at this time, and by now we're talking just minutes ago, 184 hospitalized, 2 dead. They said to us again, though, remember that where the World Trade Centers used to be, there is now a mountain of rubble. We are talking 200,000 tons of steel, 425,000 cubic yards of concrete, and 43,600 windows with all the glass in them now just lying on the ground. So the excavation has only begun, but 184 right now from St. Vincent's.
Thanks, Diane, very much. And I must tell you, I feel a little embarrassed about trying to focus on casualties in numerical terms, only because it will ultimately give us some sense of the magnitude of this attack on top of the buildings themselves being brought to the ground, and similarly true at the Pentagon. So nobody feels gruesome, or it's not about the gruesomeness of the casualty figures. It is simply trying to get some sense of the magnitude in human terms rather than the physical terms, which so much of us in the country saw just before our eyes. Before I talked to John and to Diane, I was just running there briefly through various different parts of the country where the ripple effect of these attacks were felt. In Las Vegas, for example, this is back to the Associated Press report, which they did a really good job pulling the country together. Security was increased at all of casinos on the Strip in Las Vegas, because if you think about it, for the enemies of the United States, that kind of excess is seen as a symbol of the United States as well. The only place we could find all of the federal buildings open so far was in Vermont, where the federal buildings in Montpelier and Burlington were both open, and they have an atomic energy plant up there, and it was placed on a state of heightened security as well. Whereas in Nebraska, you'll see the first of probably many examples of this in the hours and days ahead. State employees were asked if they would give blood, because blood will be needed. There is a blood shortage in the United States, as we've heard time and again from the Red Cross. It's almost at a state of crisis in terms of blood collection in the United States at the moment, and so and what do you need in a time like this? You need blood, and you need plasma for all the people who have been hurt and damaged, and so that's important. And in Nebraska, state employees were responding to requests for blood donations, and at the Air Force bases out there, and then the security was heightened. And at churches all over the country, they're beginning to have these services, which will become part of the national fabric in the next couple of days, as people pray for the victims and those we hope are survivors of this. Terry Moran is at the White House, which is his normal beat. He didn't go with the president to Florida today. It's often the case that if the president's doing a purely political trip, we ask him to stay home to give us a broader sense of things. Well, Terry, what's the state of the White House as of now?
Well, Peter, the White House has pretty much been evacuated altogether. Just before it was evacuated, we are told that the National Security Team was taken to the secure situation room in there, but they are the only people in there. White House staff, most of the White House staff was told to go home. And the president, as you've heard, flew to Louisiana and is now en route, we don't know where. As he said, he is trying to make sure that the country knows that the government is still running. We've seen around town motorcades assembling outside the various cabinet departments, and we've just seen recently some traffic into the White House. So there is some government activity, but without the president at the moment.
Terry, there's a very small collection of reporters and camera team on board the President and Air Force One at the moment. I think the only reporter on board is Ann Compton, am I correct? Or certainly the only television reporter on board?
Well, actually, Ann is in the radio seat today. The pool, as it's called, is flying with the President. Today, CBS News is the pool. It alternates every day.
Right.
This pool will travel with him wherever he goes, and he made that statement that we saw earlier to the pool. The rest of the press who is accompanying the President to Florida, we are told, is now on a bus because of the air traffic shutdown from Florida back to Washington.
Terry, I wonder if, from your perspective of our White House correspondent, whether you agree with me, and certainly our political director, I think, who says that how the President now spends his time today, what he is seen to do, is absolutely vital, not just to the country, but to him.
Well, it's critical time for him. He said that the nation is being tested. The new president is being tested as well. But he has other restrictions on what he can do. That political mission he has to reassure the country and to show that he is leading it is actually secondary or even tertiary. The first thing is he has to keep himself safe. The Secret Service is going to insist that he be secured, and then second, he must remain in efficient strategic communication with United States forces around the world. That's undoubtedly why they took him to Barksdale Air Force Base in Shreveport. But you're absolutely right. The main thing he has to do for most Americans is communicate to them that he's in charge, that he intends to take control of this situation, and as he said, hunt down the people who are responsible for it and punish them.
Terry, I know you want to go back to your reporting. Is there anything else you want to add at the moment?
Well, Peter, it's just that this whole complex, which is usually abuzz with activity, which is really an office for hundreds of people, is now silent for the most part, and an armed camp. And that is a very striking thing for all of us who go to work there every day.
And what I notice is you're to the south of the South Lawn. You're on the southern side of the White House. We very often see you broadcasting from the other side of the White House. Why are you way down where you are?
Well, we've been cleared out of the North Lawn, which is where we normally broadcast from, and we are now, as you can see, south of the south ellipse of the White House. I can tell you that the evacuation of the White House itself, which has happened before with bomb threats and suspicious cars and packages, today did not proceed as orderly as it had. Told by one of the White House staffers that their security official came in and said everybody should leave in an orderly fashion, and about a minute later an agent ran in and said, just run. Get out.
Okay, thanks very much, Terry. We'll come back to you, but you get some sense from Terry Moran standing there, locked dramatically out of the area with which he is so familiar. We saw some pictures earlier today. I'm here we get them up again for people who have just joined us, of people leaving the White House early on. First, the White House police walking out fairly casually, and then as the tension began to build and the awareness of what was going on began to be heightened, people began to run outside of the White House. This is a place supposed to be, quite extraordinarily secure. And he was, I think, more than anything else, this concern that somehow the enemy, however one defines the enemy today, had control of airspace, and that they were able to approach these otherwise secure locations from the air, therefore making them more vulnerable. But the United States has not faced any emergency like this in the modern era. And as our political director, who's also working as hard as his unit can at the moment on this, points out, information is scarce because in situations like this, reporters like us rely on government officials to tell us what is going on with government and what sort of job government is doing. And the national government is pretty close to being on what amounts to a national war footing at the moment, and it's very difficult to reach government officials. So I see Pierre Thomas, who's just come to join us, and we'll talk to him in just a moment, that is trying desperately to reach all of his contacts in the FBI, and my guess is he's having a very hard time. At any rate, Linda Douglas is in Washington with us tonight, and she is with Joe Biden, the Democratic chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who will undoubtedly have something to say. Yes, Linda.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's been very difficult to get to you today because all the communications around the Capitol have really been shut down. As you know, earlier today, the entire Capitol was evacuated, the members of Congress, the staffs. There were some very frightening moments where they were shouting at us to get down. They thought something was going to happen. The leaders of the Senate were taken away early this morning to an undisclosed location by security, and security has also told other leaders of Congress to leave the area. The minority leader of the House, Richard Gephardt, was taken away in a secret Secret Service vehicle. And as you say, with me here is Senator Biden, who is the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee and has just been meeting with other members of Congress and getting security briefings from the police mostly. But Senator Biden, what about this fear that has been communicated to the members of Congress by the security people that they should stay away right now from the center of the Capitol?
Well, I think maybe initially that made sense, Linda, but I don't think it makes sense now. The air is secure now with military planes. I think we should get back as quick as we can, Peter, into session. Now, I don't want to second-guess the security people. They want to be able to sweep the area and make sure everything's squared away. But I think we should be meeting tomorrow morning. Let the American people understand that these thugs who have done this incredible thing to the United States have not in any fundamental way altered our ability to do business. And so I think it's very important we get back to business. I've communicated that to the Majority Leader, Tom Daschle, who I think shares my view on that. And when I spoke to Senator Daschle, by the way, he was home. He was here in town. There's a number of members of Congress. Congressman Brady from Philadelphia and a number of my colleagues are literally downstairs waiting for me now. So I think we have to show that we're up, we're ready to move. We are, in fact, nothing has fundamentally altered this government. And the tragedy that occurred to these thousands of people is one that we must, in fact, follow through and find out who's responsible for. But in the meantime, we should be calm and cool and collected about going about our business as a nation. Terrorism wins when, in fact, they alter our civil liberties or shut down our institutions. We have to demonstrate neither of those things have happened.
Senator Biden, a couple of the senators I've spoken to and members of Congress as well are saying that we are now at war. Senator Shelby, who is the ranking Republican on the Intelligence Committee, says we are now essentially at war. We have to be on a war footing. Senator Hagel has said that we've got to start securing our borders, locking down our airports, revisiting the way we protect our public institutions. What about that?
I hope that's not true. I would say it another way. I would say we've come face to face with a new reality. A reality that we knew existed and we knew was possible. A reality that has happened in varying degrees in other countries. But if, in fact, in order to respond to that reality, we have to alter our civil liberties, change the way we function, then we have truly lost the war. The war is one that allows us the way to conduct the war is to demonstrate our institutions are functioning, that your civil liberties, your civil rights, your ability to be free and walk and move around, in fact, are not fundamentally altered. Anybody who's willing to strap dynamite to their body or have a suicide kamikaze mission, you'll never fundamentally be able to stop. It doesn't matter what you do. There are a lot of things we can do, though, to diminish significantly the possibility of this happening again without changing our character as a nation.
Well, it's an amazing scene here, Peter. The skies are clear. There are usually planes in the sky. The skies are clear over the Capitol. The streets are completely empty. There is still smoke rising up from the Pentagon where the plane hit the Pentagon earlier. And as you can see, the members of Congress are all trying to grapple with what to do next. Senator Biden, of course, is going to be receiving all kinds of security briefings.
Linda, I have a question, if I may.
Yes, Peter. Go ahead.
I have a question for the Senator. I apologize via you. The senator is the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, so he is party to all of the information in the intelligence community. Was the intelligence community so taken up with the idea of chemical and biological warfare against the United States that they didn't pay enough attention to this possibility?
Well, they clearly understood this was a possibility. The problem has been we have been focusing, in my view, I don't want to second guess anybody here. Look, the prospect of a chemical, biological, pathogen probability is real. Some of us, literally as recently as yesterday, I spoke to the National Press Club and talked about the fact that it's just as easy to fly from National Airport into the White House as it is to, do the same thing in New York. I mean, look, we know all these possibilities exist. And one of the things we have to do is we have to get our priorities straight in terms of what the real threats are that face us and use the assets we have to begin to deal with those threats. What I don't want everybody to think is this is some worldwide conspiracy where there's tens of thousands of people who are part of this army that attacked us. This is a group of people who are very well organized, obviously are relatively well funded, and we have to figure out how their network has worked, but we have to penetrate it. But it's not, we can't, Peter, just say we're going to focus only on this kind of incident and not on chemical and not on biological and not on pathogens, not on anthrax. This, in a sense, is the most god-awful wake-up call we've ever had.
Senator, let me ask you
how we have to redirect our resources.
Let me ask you one more question, then. I didn't realize you could hear me. At the Pentagon and the State Department, you'll already hear people doing what they almost always do in an instance like this. This is so sophisticated it must be Osama bin Laden. Maybe so, but is the United States too focused on one man?
The tendency in these circumstances is to be too focused on one man, one idea, one prospect. I think that we should be calm. Those of us who hold high public office, just calm down a little bit, collect our thoughts, collect the information, and in a methodical way analyze what we know happened and what we can derive from that. I think it's much too early for us to make those kinds of judgments. The first thing is what the president is doing. He called for calm. He's getting in the airplane. He's coming back to Washington, D.C., and I applaud him for that. And we should be back up and running as quickly as we can. And I think we should do that. This cannot be dealt with overnight. It's an incredible tragedy. But it's the new threat of the 21st century that we are now facing. And we're going to find a way to do it. This nation is too big, too strong, too united, too much a power in terms of our cohesion and our values to let this break us apart. And it won't happen. It won't happen.
Many thanks, Senator. And Linda, do you want to add something? Linda Douglas?
Well, I just want to say that this is the beginning of what will clearly be an enormous, profound debate here in the Capitol. The dynamics of the debate in this country, as I've discovered in talking to members of Congress, have been fundamentally altered now. And here you're hearing a discussion of whether we should lock down, open up, and how we tackle this, and what our priorities are, and how we protect ourselves. So I've had just astonishing conversations with members of Congress, Peter, and there's a very grave feeling here right now in the Capitol.
Linda, thank you very much, and thank you, Senator Biden, as well. We'll have Linda Douglas available to us all the time, thank goodness, and Senator Biden says one of the most profound things about all this, which we've said several times this morning, which the terrorist wins when he or she manages to alter the behavior of a people, or infringes on the way of life in a country, that the country, a democratic country particularly, alters its way of life, because that's a step up for the terrorist in question, because it raises the whole question of civil liberties and access and freedom of movement. And Pierre Thomas has just come back to join us. You've had this tremendous argument from covers the
state level and at the federal level. And we ask all citizens of the city of Los Angeles to please be aware and please be sensitive to our heightened security measures. There's going to be places in the downtown area and other places in Los Angeles where you will see increased police presence. There will be parts of the city of Los Angeles where people may be asked for identification or asked if you live or work in a particular area, and we're asking for everybody's cooperation. We will continue to monitor activities throughout the course of the day, progress in the city of Los Angeles, and activities throughout the country. As I mentioned before, we'll revisit the reopening of City Hall later on in the day and other facilities throughout the city of Los Angeles on a periodic basis, and we will do our best to keep you informed. At this point in time, I'd like to call forward for a brief statement the Chief of Police of the city of Los Angeles, Chief Bernard Parks.
Good morning. Again, I'd like to extend our condolences to the families of many of these tragedies, and we certainly do not know at this point just to the extent of them. But based on that information, the Los Angeles Police Department and the Fire Department has been working hand in hand since 5:30 this morning to assess what is going on in other parts of this country, to take precautionary moves in this city to ensure the safety of the entire public. We have completely reviewed all of our major facilities. We've looked at all of our police station standing plans, the security plans. We have put extra officers in the field. We've held over our morning watch. We've done all the things that we think are necessary to assess these issues. We've been in touch with the LA County Sheriff's Department, the local FBI, and all of our law enforcement brothers and sisters to talk about these issues and see what information they may have that would make us better prepared. We want to assure the public that the City of LA is prepared to address this. It's all precautionary, but we cannot be more concerned and cautious after we see the vivid images on the television screen. So we just wanted to make that assurances. We'll be working throughout the day with all the law enforcement partners in this community to ensure that information is passed on readily, that we are aware of all the circumstances and assessment of intelligence information, and so that we can bring about the safest environment in the city of LA. There's one number I'd like to give and encourage you to put this out to the public. It's 888-356-4661. This is a universal number that call in that will give periodic updates on any information dealing with emergency concerns in the city of Los Angeles. We'd like to have that number out as far and wide as we possibly can. Again, it's 888-356-4661. We certainly encourage you to put that out. But we certainly want to, again, reassure the public that all is safe in the city of LA. We certainly have no guarantees, but we're certainly looking at all of the precautionary measures to ensure that the community is as safe as possible. Thank you.
Chief, have you gotten any intelligence information that would indicate why West Coast flights were targeted?
We're going to answer your questions after Chief
I have a couple more speakers, and then we'll answer just a few questions. Before I call up the fire chief, I wanted to make a couple more comments. One is, as you all know, our airport, LAX, has been closed to incoming and outgoing flights and will continue to be so, I believe, until further notice. Domestic flights have been rerouted to other locations that will not be disclosed for security reasons, and international flights have been rerouted to Canada. In addition, our harbor has been closed to incoming ships. Again, a safety and precautionary measure, but I want to underscore, we have not received any credible threats, have not confirmed any threats against the city of Los Angeles at this time. And finally, anticipating the question, I have been in touch with Mayor Jim Hahn, who's in Washington, D.C. this morning. He has been fully briefed and apprised of all the activities this morning and is fully aware of what's going on. At this point in time, I'd like to call forward our fire chief, Chief Bamatri.
Good morning. I'd also like to reassure the citizens of Los Angeles that the fire department has taken effective measures to ensure that we have sufficient resources. We've augmented our resources by about 1/3, and in fact, we're experiencing normal incident level at this time. I think it's important for all of us to focus on now the aftermath of what we've seen happen this morning and how we can lend our support both here locally and nationally. We do have a urban search and rescue team that has been activated. It's in the process of deploying. They will be flying to New York to assist in the response there. That team consists of 64 members, and they will be there probably for about a week. There are 27 teams nationally, and I'm sure other teams have been activated also to lend assistance to New York. Locally, we will be providing assistance out at the airport to those passengers and those travelers that have been impacted by the closure of the flights there, and we'll be dealing with those the aftermath of the problems associated with the closure of the airport. So again, all resources are available. We have taken preparedness precautions, and as far as being able to meet the needs, we see that being no problem at this time.
Thank you, Chief. Finally, I'd like to call forward the General Manager of our Emergency Preparedness Department and the Director of the Emergency Operations Center, Mr. Ellis Stanley.
Thank you. Indeed, this is a tragic day for America, and it's important that we do what we can as citizens. And the American Red Cross is one way that all citizens can give, by giving blood. Contact your local Red Cross and give blood if you can. It's important also to know that we are in liaison with all of our counterparts, city, county, private sector, federal and state government, and that any consequences that we may have, we are prepared to deal with them. It really is a tragic day for America, and it's important that you and the citizens of this great city understand that we do have a strong preparedness program and that we're working together to make sure that anything that happens, we're prepared to deal with it.
Before we open it up to questions, I did want to make a brief statement in Spanish for the benefit of the Spanish language media and residents of the city of Los Angeles. Buenos días y muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos esta mañana. Queríamos hacer un anuncio poco después de una junta que tuvimos esta mañana con los gerentes de todos los departamentos.
You are watching a press conference live from LA City Hall East. We heard from a number of people, including Alex Padilla, who is speaking right now in Spanish. He is the acting mayor because Mayor Jim Hahn is in Washington, D.C. Most importantly, he said he made a plea to all citizens of Los Angeles to be aware and be sensitive to the heightened security measures that are in place right now across the city of Los Angeles. Be prepared to show your ID. Be prepared to answer for whatever your business might be. In determining where you are and what you are doing, be prepared and be aware. The good news is, as Police Bernard Park said, that the city of Los Angeles right now is safe. There have been no reports of any threats against this city. However, we are on heightened alert. People have been deployed, officers deployed throughout the city to ensure the safety of buildings that may be a potential targets. And because of these emergency concerns, they've established an emergency hotline where you can get updates on the situation across the city of Los Angeles. I'll read that hotline number to you right now, and eventually we'll have that for you on our website and on our full screen. It's 888-356-4661. 888-356-4661. That is a hotline that they will continually update to make you aware of any emergency concerns across the city of Los Angeles. We'll make that number available for you, and you can find it across the bottom of our screen, the screen that you're looking at right now. In the meantime, we have other information that we want to let you know about. There has been a plea by Ellis, the gentleman that you saw right there. He asked for folks to please donate blood to the Red Cross. That would be another thing that we need to be very concerned with. A blood shortage has been quite severe this summer, and because of this tragedy, there is going to be a heightened need for it across the country. Also, the LA Fire Chief, William Bamatre, said that we have sent an urban search and rescue team from Los Angeles. It's a 64-member crew. They're headed to New York to help in the efforts to save the folks who may be in the rubble and in the disaster area in New York. These are all live statements coming from downtown East City Hall, and also we are anticipating a couple of more live press conferences for you. Sheriff Lee Baca will be joining us from the LA County Emergency Operations Center in East LA. He's going to be coming up in a matter of just a few minutes. Also, we anticipate hearing Mayor Jim Hahn live from Washington, D.C. He is hoped to join us sometime around the noon hour, and we'll bring that to you live, as well as Governor Gray Davis. We anticipate that he's going to join us as well from the state capitol in Sacramento. So all these are coming your way in a matter of just a few minutes to get you up to date on the situation right here in Southern California and throughout the state of California. We also, I'm going to take this time to quickly alert you on a number of closings, a number of situations you need to be aware of that will definitely affect your life today. First of all, just broadly, I'll tell you that a number of businesses are shut down right now. That means not only businesses downtown like City Hall, etc., but also shopping malls have been closed. You're not going to do a whole lot of shopping. When it comes to your transportation, you're going to find some of the exits around LAX to be closed completely for security measures. LAX has been shut down and evacuated. It's going to be slow going for you to get around the LAX area. That's off of the 105 freeway and the 405 freeway. If you're anticipating and doing any kind of a recreation tonight, a number of things have been canceled, including the LA County Fair. Shows have been canceled. Madonna has canceled her show. The Lion King canceled. Vagina Monologues, Kiss Me Kate, a number of shows across Southern California. Cal State University campuses have been closed. That's some 350,000 students throughout the state of California. All campuses have been closed today. LAUSD is in session right now, is in progress. Teachers and students are at school today. However, if your child or student goes to La Cañada High School, La Cañada High School has been closed today. A number of other places right now. Let me look over my notes real quickly. LA County Fair, I said that. Museum of Tolerance is closed. All the local airports are shut down. Universal Studios, Disneyland, Knott's Berry Farm, all the amusement parks, Six Flags, Magic Mountain, they have been shut down as well. It's going to be tough for you to find places that are in fact open as a security measure, and a lot of folks want to stay home and just sit this thing out and make sure everything goes smoothly. Let me give you some information when it comes to the airline hotlines. As we know, as we are gathering more information about the planes that have crashed, and we all witnessed it in some of the devastating video, some of the information is changing as to what airlines were going where. But we do know 2 American airline flights and 2 United flights have crashed. 3 of those 4 flights were headed to LAX. So if you think you have a loved one on one of those flights, here are a couple of hotline numbers for you to call. 800-245-0999. That's the American Airlines hotline number, 800-245-0999. And the United Airlines hotline number is 800-932-8555. 800-932-8555. And the LA Safety Hotline. This is when you have any questions when it comes to emergency concerns, security concerns going on across Southern California, or LA specifically, 888-356-4661. 888-356-4661. We also received some word that the Navy from the Pentagon has called all Navy personnel to please come in and report. Obviously, they're under heightened alert too, so if you are within earshot of me and you are in the Navy, you're asked to be reporting. Latin Grammys, they were supposed to happen tonight at the Forum. They have been postponed or canceled. If they are rescheduled, we'll let you know. And Sunday's Primetime Emmy Awards, which were to happen here in Los Angeles this Sunday, they have also been postponed. The date for them to actually happen has not been determined just yet. As soon as it is, we'll let you know. The LA subway system, the Metro MTA Red Line, if you're traveling via subway, it is open right now, but be aware they are anticipating closing that down as of 1 p.m. today. They hope to have it shut down only for about an hour while they check the approximately 17 miles of track to make sure the subway is safe, and then they hope to reopen it, but it's going to shut down as of 1 o'clock today, so you have about an hour and a half of subway left. Buses are running right now. If you're a sports fan, baseball games in Major League Baseball have been postponed or canceled. No baseball tonight. The U.S.-Mexico border was shut down for a little while. They reopened it, but they warn us that because of the heightened security measures that it is really bogged down. So if you anticipated crossing the border into Mexico, it's going to be slow going for you. I mentioned all the airports have been shut down. Los Angeles International Airport has been evacuated. A number of studios, in fact, most of the studios across Southern California, be it TV shows, movie studios, and group tours, they have all been shut down as well. Once again, we are anticipating a press conference from Sheriff Lee Baca. He's going to be joining us from the Los Angeles County Emergency Operations Center in East LA. That's coming up shortly. Governor Gray Davis is going to join us live as well with some statement from the state capitol, and Mayor Jim Hahn is going to join us live from Washington, D.C. Do we have information yet on the airline flights? I'm going to talk to my producer. Okay, we're going to hold off on that. What I think we're going to do right now is we anticipate getting back to those press conferences because that's probably going to have some important information with regards to you and how you conduct your day today. As soon as those press conferences happen, we're going to bring that to you live. In the meantime, why don't we join the network back live and see what more information that they have, and we'll see you right here live from the Eyewitness Newsroom in just a little while.
Appreciate your time, Senator John McCain of Arizona, who knows a lot about violence, and many people in the country will think knows a lot about leadership as well. Former presidential candidate, often talking about doing it, or often considered to be doing it again. Claire Shipman is in Washington. Claire, where's Mr. Bush?
Well, Peter, we have a little bit of news on that front. As you know, he is in the air again on his way somewhere from Shreveport, Louisiana. We have been told by sources that he will not be coming to Washington. He is going to make another stop at an undisclosed secure location so that he can talk to people from there on the ground. His security team can assess just how safe it is back here in Washington. As you mentioned earlier, that there must be great political pressure for him to get back to Washington. These sources confirm just that. The political team wants him back home. He wants to come back home. His security team does not feel it is safe right now. They do think, though, and they're guessing right now, that he might be able to get back at some point this evening. But again, he's got at least one more stop. Another interesting point along those lines.
Hold on, one more stop.
One more stop between Shreveport and Washington. He's on his way now, we're told, to another undisclosed location that his security team considers secure. They won't tell us where it is, obviously.
But do we know? So, in other words, this one more stop is another security stop dictated by the Secret Service?
Indeed it is, and we would be guessing if we talked about another Air Force base or something of the kind, but they have a number of stops, and I'm told this one is not anywhere in the direction of Washington, that they have a number of places they can take him.
Let me ask you this. Have you heard any mention whatsoever of the possibility the President will come to New York?
No, there was a rumor to that effect earlier, Peter, but that was shot down, and my sources tell me he is not going anywhere near New York right now. That situation would create chaos that New York just doesn't need at this point.
Absolutely.
They've also told us that their full security plan is in effect. They do have the House and Senate leadership out of town. Condoleezza Rice is the only senior official remaining at the White House, and she will remain at the White House to try to coordinate efforts from there. Mrs. Bush has also been spirited away. She was on Capitol Hill this morning set to address Congress. She's been taken to an undisclosed location. Peter.
Now, there was some mention that there was some mention of the fact that the United Airlines aircraft that crashed east to southeast of Pittsburgh may have been, in fact, going in the direction of Camp David. Had you heard that?
I heard that, as you did. My security sources don't know anything about that, so we haven't been able to confirm anything along those lines.
Then we'll leave it alone. Claire, thanks very much. We'll come back to you as soon as we know where the President is going to go next. Seems a little bit strange. Pierre Thomas, work on the phones on the FBI. What have you got, Pierre?
Well, one of the first things that they are focused on, obviously, is the injured, but the next priority is to get to Dulles International Airport, which they are, and Boston Logan. They are going to talk to the Boston United and American airline officials. They're trying to get a sense of who was on the plane. Early on, they're very limited in what they can do. They're trying to assess the situation, but one of the first things they can try to do is try to get a sense of who was on the plane, try to begin to check out aliases, and that might lead them in some investigative direction. But they're very limited in the early stages in terms of what they can do.
Exactly. Many thanks. And as you and John Miller have reminded us several times today, we're covering a tragedy and we are covering a crime. And so the FBI is now beginning to get things together in terms of trying to piece together the elements of crime. The only thing you get out of the airplane, one assumes at this point, is a long time from now, evidence of explosives on board that were not the gas tanks, the black boxes, which survive pretty much anything. I think it is our experience. But in terms of trying to chase down the human beings, going to those two airports to see who got on board and checking the passenger list.
Absolutely. Things that they can't get at right now. They can't do very much investigative work at the scenes. Right. So where they go is where the plane took off from. Talk to those officials. Officials told me, quote, we're trying to talk to any and everyone who touched that plane, from maintenance workers to the people who ticketed the persons getting on the plane.
Great. Thanks, Pierre. Keep at it. By the way, the Federal Aviation Administration says that the earliest that they will allow flights to resume, this may change, will be noon tomorrow. More than 24 hours after they first ordered all aircraft not to take off and then all aircraft to land as soon as possible. And I think that all domestic U.S. flights are now currently on the ground. Some international flights coming from overseas are still on their way to West Coast airports and still in the air. But what is quite staggering here in a way is the FAA says they will only allow flights to resume at noon tomorrow. We're talking, if you add it up, about approximately somewhere in the neighborhood of 36,000 flights back and forth and up and down and all the interim places across the United States. We all know, those of us who travel by air on a regular basis, exactly how difficult air travel is and how much of it there is at the moment. But there's a outstanding example of what it means to put out an order like that. 36,000 flights going to be halted. In fact, I think Charlie Gibson, my colleague who was here when this happened this morning, has been looking particularly at this dimension of it. Charlie?
Well, Peter, I just found a note that all U.S. commercial aircraft, I wasn't absolutely certain what you said a moment ago, but that all U.S. commercial aircraft.
This is David Ono in the Eyewitness Newsroom in Glendale. Right now we are heading to a press conference by Sheriff Lee Baca. This is the L.A. County Emergency Operations Center in East L.A. Let's listen in. Sheriff Lee Baca.
Press conference part. I just want to set the stage here. Surrounding me here
are the leaders of Los Angeles County and the state of California relative to a public safety response to what we think is important for the residents of Los Angeles County. I want to introduce to you, first of all, Chief Mike Brown from the California Highway Patrol. Chief Brown. Also from the Los Angeles County Fire Department, Chief P. Michael Freeman. Chief Freeman. We have representing Los Angeles Police Department, Commander Betty Calapets. Representing the Federal Bureau of Investigation is Mr. Richard Garcia, Special Agent in charge of the Criminal Division. We have Mr. David Jansen, the Chief Administrative Officer from the County of Los Angeles. Chief Bayan Lewis, who is also the Chief of the County Police Services. Supervisor Yvonne Brathwaite Burke, and Supervisor Don Kanabi. It is appropriate for me to open this conference by expressing my condolences and the condolences of all the people of Los Angeles County to the people of New York. As this tragedy unfolds, there's no question that many things are not answered, and therefore preparedness is something we must all engage in. The sheriff has special responsibilities. As the Region 1 coordinator for disaster preparedness and emergency response, I have the obligation to coordinate my effort with the governor of this state, and I've been doing so as of now. I've been in communication with all the region coordinators throughout the state, which are likewise sheriffs as myself. I will speak with the governor at 12 p.m., and we will further discuss what California must do to protect its citizens. Meanwhile, the County of Los Angeles is now in a state of emergency alert. The alertness that we believe is important for all law enforcement and public safety are as follows. First of all, we have an emergency preparedness plan. And this plan is something we've engaged in years of experience, where we have experienced disasters of various types within our county. Our Department Operations Center and the County Emergency Operations Center is now activated, and it will remain activated until we get some clarity as to the solution of the problems that are occurring in New York. I've directed all county law enforcement agencies to be in a coordinated alert status with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. And this includes the Orange County Sheriff's Department and all law enforcement agencies within the County of Orange. We have prepared and put in place a terrorism early warning group. It is now activated. We have a county-wide tactical alert that is now issued. We have a critical resource staging of the Special Enforcement Bureau of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. We have an air rescue system that is now on alert and is also staged. We have a field force of 212 personnel that are deputy sheriffs that are able to respond immediately to any possible problem of this kind. We have over 1,000 other deputy sheriffs who are now on alert. There is a tactical response force of an additional 120 personnel. We have over 1,600 volunteers who are involved with disaster communications that are now being alerted. There are 5 search and rescue teams that are also a part of the Sheriff's Rescue Program. And we have our arson explosive bomb squad details on 12 and 12 schedules, and they are staged in appropriate parts of the county so they can respond at any moment. And finally, our Aero Bureau is now on full alert and coordinating whatever effort it has to with FAA and other law enforcement agencies. We are at this point in a continual meeting process, looking at all of the evolving events at the New York area so that we can have as much information as possible as to what the circumstances were that led to those terrorist attacks there. At this point, I will ask Chief Mike Brown of the California Highway Patrol to give a few comments as to what the state's effort is in this regard.
Thank you, Sheriff. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Since early this morning, the Highway Patrol has been on tactical alert, as have the other agencies in Los Angeles County. We have brought in additional officers to assist us with some transportation-related issues we anticipated. In fact, those have occurred, largely with some of the evacuations that have occurred in certain parts of Los Angeles County with public buildings. We do ask that the public try to refrain from unnecessary travel, at least for the short term, until we can get past this and find out more information. And we are also working with our local counterparts and the federal authorities and sharing our assets and information, as well as making certain that we can have a coordinated effort from the state and local level here in Los Angeles County, working through the sheriff here, so that we can respond to the public's concerns. Again, we're working very closely, operating our emergency operations plans, and we have been operational since early this morning after the event transpired in New York City. Thank you.
I would like to now introduce Chief P. Michael Freeman of the County Fire Department.
Thank you very much. Good morning. First of all, on behalf of all the men and women in the fire service here in California, we also extend our condolences to all the victims of this apparent reported act of terrorism. Immediately this morning, upon being informed of what had occurred, we did take care of our local needs and increased our on-duty staffing. We have made special arrangements to be sure that we are fully prepared and staffed to deal with any eventuality here, whether it be fire-related or whether it be related to any sort of medical emergency. We also immediately performed our role as the Regional Mutual Aid Coordinator for Fire Services, and we have assessed the readiness for this entire 5-county area for which we are responsible. We have also been in contact with the state of California, the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, to be sure that the statewide mutual aid resources are in line for fire response if needed. Consistent with this level of alert here within Los Angeles County, we have established personal liaison with the various law enforcement agencies and fire agencies that are involved in this local alert to be sure that we are ready to respond in the event that's necessary. Again, our concern is that we have a level of readiness, but also a state of calm as we, in condolence with the entire country, work through these very difficult times.
Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Richard Garcia, the Special Agent in charge of the Criminal Division of the FBI.
Thank you, Sheriff Baca. Today, brave men and women, citizens of this country, as well as others, victims, died in what appears to be a cowardly act of terrorism. Investigations by the FBI has been set at a heightened alert, not only here in Los Angeles, but also throughout the world. The FBI has been coordinating with not only our office in Washington, D.C., but has presence with the FAA, the military, and other state and local offices. We are collecting all the information we can possible regarding this investigation in a global sense. We are going through the information to determine the potential perpetrators of these crimes, and we will also try to resolve it as quickly as possible. The FBI will be always working in a very coordinated effort with law enforcement and other government agencies, as well as other countries in this world, to try to come to a conclusion to this case. Our hearts go out to all those who have died and are injured as a result of this. The FBI in Los Angeles is working with the other offices in the FBI throughout this country, and we should be able to hopefully in some near future provide some resolution to this. Thank you.
And finally, I will introduce to you Supervisor Yvonne Brathwaite-Burke, who will also be followed by Supervisor Don Kanabe.
Thank you very much, Sheriff. I would like to certainly give our sympathy and our concern to everyone who has been victimized by this terrorism. The people in the Pentagon, the people in New York. And I'd like to particularly say to those citizens of Los Angeles who have lost friends and relatives as a result of these plane crashes, who were on those planes on their way to Los Angeles. We want to say to them that you have our heartfelt sympathy and our prayers. We are taking every effort and making every effort to make sure that everyone in Los Angeles County is safe. We're not taking anything, just not taking it seriously. If any threats come up, we're looking at them because we want to make sure that all facilities are safe. I also want to say to the citizens of Los Angeles, let's not take retribution against other innocent citizens within our communities because of their ethnicity or because we feel as though they look differently than from us. I would say to them, we want to look at this as an issue that is of worldwide significance, but we do not want to try to take it out on any of the people of our community. We want to say our health facilities will be operating, and in the event we have a need for them, we are making every effort to assure that they will be ready, as will all facilities. If there are emergencies in Los Angeles, we are preparing, and we've been meeting all of this time this morning to make sure that everything works, but we are also not taking anything for granted. Every possible target of terrorism will be guarded, and so that we will not have to face unnecessary problems in Los Angeles County. I want to say to the sheriff, we appreciate the leadership he has given here, and I want to also say to all of these representatives of whether it's fire, highway patrol, law enforcement, this is a time for us all to work together to protect the citizens of Los Angeles. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne. I think the thing that we want to communicate to all the citizens of Los Angeles County is that we're up and operating. We have a very distinct advantage that those innocent victims today in New York and Washington did not have, and that's a stage of preparedness. And with the coordinated effort of the Sheriff's Department and all the other law enforcement and public safety agencies here in the county, we are in stage 1 alert and ready and able. And I think that that's the big issue. Vital county services are up and operating, and I think we want to communicate that in a message that Yvonne mentioned as well, and that's the fact that you know, there's been a lot of accusations early on who may have been responsible, who may not. The one thing that we won't want to do is to become terrorists ourselves and to create innocent American victims just like they did on us today. And so I know Yvonne and I are both glad to be here. We were supposed to have been in an airplane to Washington, D.C. at 8:30 this morning. So we didn't quite make that airplane, but fortunately. And so to everyone, particularly to the victims and their families in New York and Washington, our heartfelt thanks. And to all our public safety personnel, keep up the good work.
As a point of information, Supervisor Antonovich and Supervisor Yaroslavsky are in Washington now. And prior to this tragedy occurring, myself and our 2 board members who are present were on their way to Washington to discuss vital matters relative to the county's fiscal problems and things that go on within our normal course of government. When you examine this type of incident, there's no question that our nation is in mourning at this time. But those of us who are in law enforcement, those of us who are part of the defense mechanisms of our country, are in constant communication with one another. And the important message is this, that we are a united group of people and that we will ferret out whatever facts and evidence are necessary to get to the bottom of this tragedy. I have relationships and communication links with all of the law enforcement executives in our country, particularly in the major counties and the major cities, and we are in a constant networking of expressing information that is important to one another so that we can do a better job together. Our nation will pull together in this circumstance of tragedy. It always has, it always will. And the important thing now is to focus our attention on New York and focus our attention on possible targets such as Los Angeles. That we have done. We're now open for questions.
Can you have a statement for the Spanish-speaking media, please?
We will have a Spanish-speaking person talk to the media in a more extensive fashion. We would have to repeat this entire process at this time. Right now, I want to focus on answering any questions relative to what has been said at this point.
Sheriff, you or the FBI Representative Richard Garcia, do any of you have any preliminary explanations as to why planes going to Los Angeles?
You've been listening to Sheriff Lee Baca. He was live there with a press conference along with Chief Mike Brown with the CHP, Chief Michael Freeman with the LA County Fire Department, Richard Garcia, Special Agent with the FBI, Superintendent Yvonne Brathwaite Burke and Don Kanabi as well. Now, a couple of key points made in that press conference. First of all, Chief Mike Brown said, and he's with the CHP, he said, please refrain from unnecessary travel as to keep things running smoothly. Stay home if you can. Just stay off the roads and stay away from major facilities right now. Most of them are closed anyway. The LA County Fire Department, they have a level of readiness, but they also say, please stay calm. Everybody is ready here in Los Angeles. We're on stage 1 alert. Everything is fine. They say there are no specific threats to Los Angeles. They want to make sure that you know that right now the city of Los Angeles is safe, for you to remain calm, but also to try not to travel everywhere. If you don't have to, if it's unnecessary, try to stay home. All right, we have live via the phone a gentleman named Arthur Cass, and Mr. Cass, he was in the World Trade Center building when this devastating tragedy occurred this morning, and he joins us via the telephone to talk to us more about it. Mr. Cass, are you there?
Here, if you can hear me.
Yes, you're a little bit low. We'll try to get our audio person to turn that up just a tad bit. Can you speak again?
Yeah, I'm here. Yep.
There you go. I can hear you fine. Thank you very much for joining us. You're in New York right now, obviously.
That's right. We're stuck here.
You're stuck there. You were in the World Trade Center this morning. Do you work there?
No, I don't. I was there for a meeting with a client. I was there on the 39th floor of One World Trade, and I don't know whatever time that first plane hit, we felt it.
Can you just describe what happened from that point on?
Well, I guess it would be comparable to what you guys would call an earthquake.
Right.
The building shook, and there was just looking at, we were in an interior conference room, and looking outside the window, we just saw debris pouring down. And at that point, everybody just said, everybody is in unison just said, head for the stairs. And that's what we did. And, you know, fortunately, we were at a floor that wasn't affected at the point. And I will say this, people were fabulous. They were fantastic. They were supportive. They were calm. They were civilized. You know, they knew something major would happen, but they also knew to keep their heads straight.
Now, I also understand that some of the people that you were with and around, they were around when the World Trade Center was bombed back in '93, and I imagine that was a wealth of experience and information when it comes to this emergency procedure kicking into place.
Well, all I was hearing from, you know, total strangers next to me saying, this is the last time I'm ever working in this building again. I've had it.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a common theme from a handful of people that were in that stairwell with me.
Did it ever become clear to you what was going on, that a plane had crashed into your building and in fact this was a terrorist?
So it would take a minimum of experience, but some familiarity with the cockpit of a 757 or a 67 to do what was done today.
I believe so, Peter,
Is that what
because
you're saying, John?
again, you know, that is what I'm saying. I'm saying that any pilot could get into those cockpits with an airplane in flight and physically pull and push and turn and manipulate that airplane. But if you're planning this and you want to make sure that they do it right and they don't mess it up somehow, you're going to want people who have had exposure to that class of airplane. And that's where I think we may end up seeing this investigation go.
And I actually think, if I recall correctly, that many hours ago you raised the possibility that someone who did this had some time in a simulator.
There is a high likelihood that if you were going to plan this again over a period of time, a year or two, that you could, if you were the planning organization, find a way to get your pilots that you wanted trained into a simulator someplace in the world. There are a lot of 757 and 767 training, or a lot of it available. And, you know, our people train air crews from all over the world, our people meaning in the United States. We wouldn't necessarily have any clue of what was in their hearts or what they were planning to do if they came in the door from a legitimate carrier or even a private operator of a 757, because there are some private ones out there.
We know as a nation, as we said, our thoughts and prayers are with those families and those injured and those who are the casualties of today's attack.
God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Well, I do not know I do not know whether that was a spontaneous gesture, but whether it was or was not, to see members of the House and the Senate, men and women, hugging each other in the face of this attack on the country, standing together on the steps of the Capitol on the evening of the 11th day of the month, 9th month of the year, singing God Bless America, surely reflects some heartfelt attempt by the members of the Congress to say to the world that this is a unified nation in the face of tragedy, as it has, for the most part, always been thus.
Read all about it.
There is, rippling across this country,
Suicide bombers, suicide bombers.
great fear tonight. This attack was on every American.
I can't believe it. And it's so sad that it's come to this.
The first thing I thought of this morning when I saw that was Hiroshima, Pearl Harbor, all over again. The horror of it. And thinking that we're headed for World War III.
I want to go home to my family right now. That's what I want to do, get close to my kids.
We were seeing things we have never seen before, not just on our TV sets, but signs all around that this is as serious as it gets. At the airports is where it was most obvious, the national confusion.
I'm really scared. I feel helpless.
Paralysis.
All the lines on the cell phones are all busy.
Planes making their way to the first airport in sight. Unloaded passengers stunned to find themselves in places they had no plans to be, unsure what to do.
I'm just totally shook up right now because we were in the air when it happened. We're not told anything about it.
They said good luck, sleep in the airport.
And in city after city, anxious officials evacuated one building after another.
Our boss just finally came and told us, just go ahead and leave.
Not because of actual threats, but because no one knew what might be next.
There is a war here now.
We are a nation now on high alert, not just militarily, but psychologically, shaken on every level.
Just waiting.
For what?
To see if anything else is going to happen. To see if we're going to be attacked here in Atlanta.
It's a very strange feeling to be so threatened.
The uncertainty set in motion a wave of shutting down across the nation. Not just the obvious, government buildings, but malls in Georgia and theme parks in Florida.
Due to unforeseen circumstances, the Magic Kingdom is now closing.
And schools everywhere.
Our military at home and around the world.
And in those classrooms still in session, you could hear the anxiety of the youngest generations, for whom this kind of attack had been limited to their history lessons until today.
They hit the Pentagon. It's a slap in the face. It's the nerve center of our military, and they hit the Pentagon? What is that?
I always thought America was like my superhero, like nothing could harm America. I mean, America is everyone's defender.
This is an attack on our generation. It is an attack on our culture, our system, our values, what we do.
There is a growing sense tonight that what we do now will truly define us as a nation.
I'd hate to see panic, because then whoever did this will win, and we can't let them win.
We are Americans, and I'm glad I am an American. We need, we just need to come together, and I think we will.
It will take that and much more in the coming days to see the nation, the entire nation, through this.
Head that way.
Erin Hayes, ABC News, Atlanta.
Peter, I don't know how much you can see down here, but we have heavy mobilization. We have cranes coming in. We have bulldozers, generators, lights coming in because, of course, city power is out. I'm told they're coming in part to uncover the rubble from a subway station that partially collapsed. Also, they're going to take a look at the rubble closer up. If you can move the camera in, you can see the gray haze, which is the smoke from what is still burning. Not only the rubble of the two tall towers this morning that were blasted, but also that third building, the 47-story Tishman building, which had been evacuated. And then we're told that the Marriott Hotel is still on fire, but firefighters have given up on that right now. So right now, building's still on fire, everybody evacuated out there. I'm going to bring in Don Baylor once more for a couple of footnotes into this scene, Peter, because he's been walking the streets all day.
Ask him to
Don,
speak
you
up.
saw a jet engine, you saw a turbine engine
Yeah, it was obviously an engine from a large jet that is over on the left-hand side about 2 blocks down this way. It landed on what I think was a phone booth, but it was charred. Obviously, the insides, it did not have the outer shell anymore, but it looked like the inner workings of a jet engine.
And again, we're talking blocks and blocks away, Peter, so imagine the trajectory of that engine's flight. Another thing you told me, which has such a poignancy to it, you said when you walked the scene up at the Trade Center devastation, that you were knee-deep in a carpet of financial documents.
Right, well, we were talking about the implications of this on world markets, this being probably the center of the world of finance, and nowhere was that more dramatically demonstrated than what were millions and millions of documents. I looked at financial documents, stock certificates, employment records, just lying around. Many of them were charred. It's obvious. And when you saw the explosion, you saw a cascade of paper come off these buildings, and that's what it was.
We're told it's as far away as 3 miles, Peter. And I should just say that every time you stop here, someone comes up from the EMS or from the firefighters and the police just to tell you the names of people they know who went in before them and they're not sure came out.
Already, we have these images that no one can ever forget. A tough guy mayor pained by what he saw.
Right now? The situation is that 2 airplanes have attacked apparently. Can't go to sleep. Why? We should not go to sleep. All right, well then let's go north then.
The dust, everywhere the dust.